Introduction. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Maybe you are young and ambitious. Maybe you are struggling. Maybe you've earned a few million, signed a deal, joined an elite group, or already accomplished enough to last a lifetime. Maybe you are stunned by how empty it feels at the top. Maybe you are leading others through a crisis, just got fired, or hit rock bottom. Wherever you are, your worst enemy is already inside you, your ego. Not me, you think. I am balanced. But anyone with ambition, talent, or drive carries ego. What makes us capable of great work also makes us vulnerable to this darker side. This is not a book about ego in the Freudian sense or clinical psychology. Here, ego is an unhealthy belief in our own importance. Arrogance. Self-centered ambition. The petulant child inside us choosing recognition over anything else. It is superiority and certainty beyond our actual skill or confidence. When our self-view distorts reality, as Bill Walsh said, self-confidence becomes arrogance, assertiveness becomes obstinacy, and self-assurance becomes reckless abandon. Cyril Connolly warned ego sucks us down like the law of gravity. Ego undermines mastery, creativity, teamwork, loyalty, longevity, and repeated success. It draws enemies and errors. Most of us are not egomaniacs, but ego lurks at the root of many problems, making us unable to win, unable to accept having won, and blind to why we are dissatisfied. We rarely see it. We blame others instead, remaining sick men ignorant of the cause of our malady, as Lucretius said. Ego is present with every goal, quietly undermining it. Harold Janine compared egoism to alcoholism. It grows hidden, arrogant, mistaken for confidence. Ego separates us from the world, from feedback, from understanding our abilities, and from opportunities. Marina Abramovic said, "If you start believing in your greatness, it is the death of your creativity." Ego survives on comfort. Pursuing meaningful work is terrifying, and ego soothes that fear, offering short-term relief with long-term consequences. Today, culture emboldens ego. Social media lets us boast, seek validation, and broadcast achievements to millions. We are told to think big, live big, be memorable, and emulate the visible traits of successful people. We confuse the byproducts of success with success itself. Many famous figures were egotistical, but far more were destroyed by it. Ego tempts us to gamble recklessly. At any time, we are aspiring, successful, or failing. Ego is the enemy in each stage, undermining building, maintaining, and recovering. The book is structured around these stages: aspire, success, failure. The goal is to suppress ego early, replace temptation with humility and discipline, and cultivate strength so setbacks do not destroy us. Humble in our aspirations, gracious in our success, resilient in our failures. This does not diminish your uniqueness or ability to create, innovate, or take risks. Proper achievement requires balance. As William Penn said, buildings that lie so exposed to the weather need a good foundation. So, what now? This book is written with one optimistic assumption. Your ego is not uncontrollable. It can be managed and directed. We will study people like William Tecumseh Sherman, Katharine Graham, Jackie Robinson, Eleanor Roosevelt, Bill Walsh, Benjamin Franklin, Belisarius, Angela Merkel, and George C. Marshall. Could they have achieved what they did, saving companies, advancing warfare, integrating baseball, revolutionizing football, standing against tyranny, if ego had left them self-absorbed? Their awareness and grounding were central to their accomplishments. These individuals were grounded, careful, and real. Not without ego, but they knew when to suppress it. They were great and humble. Even those often cited as ego-driven, Steve Jobs, Kanye West, did their best work when they controlled impulses and distractions. Ego alone does not create true success. Many associated traits, addiction, mania, depression, show the cost of unchecked self-absorption. We will also examine Howard Hughes, Xerxes, John DeLorean, Alexander the Great, and others who lost reality and paid in misery. Even the successful fluctuate between humility and ego, often at a high cost. When ego is removed, what remains is reality. Replacing ego is humility paired with strong, earned confidence. Ego is artificial, stolen. Confidence is earned. Ego gaslights, confidence strengthens. In these pages, you will see self-confidence elevate an underestimated general to Civil War greatness, while ego drove another general from power to ruin. Ego guided brilliant minds into bankruptcy and scandal, while grounded humility made a scientist a force for peace. Ego did not stop some coaches, politicians, and entrepreneurs from falling after initial success, while others prevailed. Some learn humility, some choose ego. Some endure fate's turns, others do not. Which will you choose? Who will you be? You have picked up this book because you know this question will come. Here it is. Let's begin. Do not believe that he who comforts you lives without struggle. His life has known difficulty and sadness, and only from that distance could he find the words that help you. Hello and welcome to Ego is the Enemy, Audiobook. The painful prologue. This is not a book about me. Yet since it is about ego, I must answer the question I cannot ignore. Who am I to write it? My story itself is not crucial to the lessons, but it provides context. I have known ego at all stages: aspiration, success, failure, and back again. At 19, sensing life-changing opportunities, I dropped out of college. Mentors competed for my attention, grooming me as their protege. Success came fast. I became the youngest executive at a Beverly Hills talent agency, helped sign huge rock bands, advised on best-selling books, and by 21, joined American Apparel as a strategist, later director of marketing. By 25, I had published a controversial bestseller, a studio optioned a show about my life, and I accumulated influence, press, money, and resources. I built a company serving well-known clients, spoke at conferences, and gained recognition. Success tempts you to tell a story, smoothing over luck and mistakes to craft a heroic narrative. That story is never honest. In my retelling, I omitted the pressures, the missteps, the public humiliations, the panic attacks, the fleeting fame, the failures of my company, and the moments of despair. These shaped ambition, achievement, and adversity. I do not believe in single epiphanies. Change comes in moments. In 2014, these moments struck me one after another. American Apparel neared bankruptcy, its admired founder ousted and destitute. The talent agency I had built was sued and crumbling. A mentor unraveled. The people I modeled my life after imploded, and I had to confront my own failures: stress, overwork, collapsing faith in myself, panic attacks over trivial matters, and personal loss. This period forced me to see my workaholism. My drive, once an asset, trapped me, defining my identity and causing pain. I realized ego had infiltrated my life, affecting my decisions, relationships, and sense of self. I saw the same in history, in friends, and in colleagues. Ego has cost admired people millions, rolling them back as they reached their goals. I glimpsed that edge myself. Attitude, toe is the enemy, on my right forearm, and the obstacle is the way, on my left. They guide me daily, through every action and choice. I wrote this book not from attained wisdom, but because I wish it had existed at my critical turning points. I rely on philosophy and history, showing those who fought ego, who prioritized higher goals over recognition. Stoic philosophy and classical thinkers inform every page. Demosthenes said virtue begins with understanding and is fulfilled by courage. Aristotle compared human nature to warped wood, bendable but never perfectly straight. We strive for straighter, even if never perfect. This book does not aim to make you feel special. It aims to make you think less of yourself, lessen investment in your own story, and free you to pursue the work you are meant to accomplish. Part 1. Aspire. Here, we are setting out to do something. We have a goal, a calling, a new beginning. Every great journey begins here. Yet far too many of us never reach our intended destination. Ego more often than not is the culprit. We build ourselves up with fantastical stories, we pretend we have it all figured out, we let our star burn bright and hot only to fizzle out, and we have no idea why. These are symptoms of ego, for which humility and reality are the cure. To whatever you aspire, ego is your enemy. He is a bold surgeon, they say, whose hand does not tremble when he performs an operation upon his own person, and he is often equally bold who does not hesitate to pull off the mysterious veil of self-delusion, which covers from his view the deformities of his own conduct. Around 374 BC, Isocrates, a prominent Athenian teacher and rhetorician, wrote to a young man named Demonicus. The boy's father had recently died, and Isocrates, a friend of the family, sought to pass on guidance in what he called noble maxims for the years ahead. Demonicus was ambitious, and Isocrates warned him of ambition's dangers. He advised that no adornment so becomes you as modesty, justice, and self-control, and urged self-discipline, resisting temper, pleasure, and pain. Flatterers, he said, should be treated as deceivers. Be affable, never haughty, deliberate slowly, act promptly, cultivate sound judgment, and train the intellect, for the greatest thing in the smallest compass is a sound mind in a human body. These ideas endured. Shakespeare drew from Isocrates when Polonius spoke to Laertes in Hamlet. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. The words reached William Tecumseh Sherman, who became one of America's greatest generals. Like Demonicus, Sherman lost his father young and was raised by a wise mentor, Thomas Ewing. Despite connections, few predicted Sherman's rise beyond regional prominence. His progress was gradual, beginning at West Point and then traveling the country on horseback, learning with each assignment. When the Civil War began, Sherman volunteered and saw action at the Battle of Bull Run, a Union defeat. Leadership shortages propelled him to brigadier general, and he met with Lincoln to discuss strategy. Remarkably, Sherman accepted promotion only on the condition he would not assume superior command. Unlike others seeking rank, he valued knowing his limits and being prepared for responsibility. An ambitious person turning down power because he wanted to be ready for it, perhaps not so strange after all. Sherman was not always a model of restraint. Early in the war, assigned to defend Kentucky with too few troops, his mania and self-doubt combined dangerously. Frustrated and paranoid, he ranted to reporters and was temporarily recalled. Weeks of rest followed, marking one of the few near disasters in an otherwise steady rise. It was after this that Sherman truly distinguished himself. At Fort Donelson, though technically senior to Ulysses S. Grant, he waived his rank, supporting Grant instead of issuing orders. "This is your show," he wrote, offering help. Together, they won one of the Union's first victories. Building on success, Sherman advocated his famous March to the Sea, a bold strategy grounded not in genius but in careful study of terrain he had scouted years earlier. Where he had once been cautious, he now held earned confidence. Moving from Chattanooga to Atlanta and then to the sea, he avoided traditional battles. Ego-driven ambition would have produced disaster. His realism revealed a path others thought impossible. His maneuver warfare relied on avoiding frontal assaults, ignoring baiting criticism, and sticking to his plan. By war's end, Sherman was famous yet uninterested in politics or public office. He wanted only to do his job and retire. To Grant, he wrote, "Be natural and yourself, and this glittering flattery will be as the passing breeze of the sea on a warm summer day." One biographer captured his unique achievements, showing why Sherman serves as a model in this phase of ascent. Among those who rise to fame, two types emerge: those born with self-belief and those whose confidence grows slowly through achievement. For the latter, success is often surprising and sweet, tempered by doubt. In that doubt lies true modesty, not false self-deprecation but the Greek sense of moderation, a poise, not a pose. If belief in yourself does not come from real achievement, it often comes from nothing. Ego fills the gap, producing sudden rises and disastrous falls. Which type will you be? Like Sherman, we must balance talent, ambition, and intensity, especially when young. His ability to do so allowed him to handle life-altering success. Where Isocrates and Shakespeare promoted self-containment and principle, our culture encourages validation, entitlement, and emotion-driven action. Many are raised on praise and inspiration, told they can do anything. In reality, this makes us weak. Talent alone is not enough. The question is whether we will use it or sabotage ourselves. Sherman was grounded in reality. He came from nothing, achieved much, and never felt entitled. He deferred to others, contributed to the team, and avoided seeking credit. His realism is often forgotten in favor of more glamorous or dramatic stories. The ability to evaluate oneself is crucial. Without it, growth is impossible. Ego distorts perception, and arrogance or fantasy impedes progress. Detachment allows perspective. Humility, diligence, and self-awareness are rare. Work rooted in truth produces lasting results. To achieve more than a fleeting moment of recognition, long-term focus is essential. We must act and live small, iteratively learning and growing, avoiding self-promotion and obsession with validation. Competitors blinded by ego jeopardize their work and sanity. We reject myths of the infallible genius and the tortured artist. Instead, we stay connected to reality and to others. Facts, as Churchill said, are better than dreams. Following Sherman and Isocrates, we recognize ego as the enemy so that success strengthens us rather than destroys us. Talk, talk, talk. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. In his famous 1934 campaign for the governorship of California, the author and activist Upton Sinclair took an unusual step. Before the election, he published a short book titled I, Governor of California and How I Ended Poverty, in which he outlined, in the past tense, the brilliant policies he had enacted as governor. The office he had not yet won. It was an untraditional move from an untraditional campaign, intended to leverage Sinclair's best asset. As an author, he knew he could communicate with the public in a way that others couldn't. Now, Sinclair's campaign was always a long shot and hardly in good shape when they published the book. But observers at the time noticed immediately the effect it had, not on the voters, but on Sinclair himself. As Carey McWilliams later wrote about his friend's gubernatorial bid as it went south, Upton not only realized that he would be defeated but seemed somehow to have lost interest in the campaign. In that vivid imagination of his, he had already acted out the part of I, Governor of California. So why bother to enact it in real life? The book was a bestseller, the campaign a failure. Sinclair lost by something like 250,000 votes. He was utterly decimated in what was probably the first modern election. It's clear what happened. His talk got out ahead of his campaign and the will to bridge the gap collapsed. Most politicians don't write books like that, but they get ahead of themselves just the same. It's a temptation that exists for everyone, for talk and hype to replace action. The empty text box. What's on your mind? Facebook asks. Compose a new tweet. Twitter beckons. Tumblr. LinkedIn. Our inbox, our iPhones, the comments section on the bottom of the article you just read. Blank spaces, begging to be filled in with thoughts, with photos, with stories. With what we're going to do, with what things should or could be like, what we hope will happen. Technology, asking you, prodding you, soliciting talk. Almost universally, the kind of performance we give on social media is positive. It's more, let me tell you how well things are going. Look how great I am. It's rarely the truth, I'm scared. I'm struggling. I don't know. At the beginning of any path, we're excited and nervous. So we seek to comfort ourselves externally instead of inwardly. There's a weak side to each of us. That, like a trade union, isn't exactly malicious but at the end of the day still wants to get as much public credit and attention as it can for doing the least. That side we call ego. The writer and former Gawker blogger Emily Gould, a real-life Hannah Horvath if there ever was one, realized this during her 2-year struggle to get a novel published. Though she had a 6-figure book deal, she was stuck. She was too busy spending a lot of time on the internet, that's why. In fact, I can't really remember anything else I did in 2010. I tumbled, I tweeted, and I scrolled. This didn't earn me any money but it felt like work. I justified my habits to myself in various ways. I was building my brand. Blogging was a creative act, even curating by reblogging someone else's post was a creative act, if you squinted. It was also the only creative thing I was doing. In other words, she did what a lot of us do when we're scared or overwhelmed by a project. She did everything but focus on it. The actual novel she was supposed to be working on stalled completely. For a year. It was easier to talk about writing, to do the exciting things related to art and creativity and literature, than to commit the act itself. She's not the only one. Someone recently published a book called Working on My Novel, filled with social media posts from writers who are clearly not working on their novels. Writing, like so many creative acts, is hard. Sitting there, staring, mad at yourself, mad at the material because it doesn't seem good enough and you don't seem good enough. In fact, many valuable endeavors we undertake are painfully difficult, whether it's coding a new startup or mastering a craft. But talking is always easy. We seem to think that silence is a sign of weakness, that being ignored is tantamount to death. So we talk as though our life depends on it. In actuality, silence is strength, particularly early on in any journey. As the philosopher Kierkegaard warned, mere gossip anticipates real talk, and to express what is still in thought weakens action by forestalling it. And that's what is so insidious about talk. Anyone can talk about himself or herself. Even a child knows how to gossip and chatter. Most people are decent at hype and sales. So what is scarce and rare? Silence. The ability to deliberately keep yourself out of the conversation and subsist without its validation. Silence is the respite of the confident and the strong. Sherman had a good rule he tried to observe. Never give reasons for you what think or do until you must. Maybe, after a while, a better reason will pop into your head. The baseball and football great Bo Jackson decided he had two things he wanted to accomplish as an athlete at Auburn. He would win the Heisman Trophy and be taken first in the NFL draft. Do you know who he told? Nobody but his girlfriend. Strategic flexibility is not the only benefit of silence while others chatter. It is also psychology. The poet Hesiod had this in mind when he said, "A man's best treasure is a thrifty tongue." Talk depletes us. Talking and doing fight for the same resources. Research shows that while goal visualization is important, after a certain point our mind begins to confuse it with actual progress. The same goes for verbalization. Even talking aloud to ourselves while we work through difficult problems has been shown to significantly decrease insight and breakthroughs. After spending so much time thinking, explaining, and talking about a task, we start to feel that we've gotten closer to achieving it. Or worse, when things get tough, we feel we can toss the whole project aside because we've given it our best try, although of course we haven't. The more difficult the task, the more uncertain the outcome, the more costly talk will be and the farther we run from actual accountability. It's sapped us of the energy desperately needed to conquer what Stephen Pressfield calls the resistance, the hurdle that stands between us and creative expression. Success requires a full 100% of our effort, and talk flitters part of that effort away before we can use it. A lot of us succumb to this temptation, particularly when we feel overwhelmed or stressed or have a lot of work to do. In our building phase, resistance will be a constant source of discomfort. Talking, listening to ourselves talk, performing for an audience, is almost like therapy. I just spent 4 hours talking about this. Doesn't that count for something? The answer is no. Doing great work is a struggle. It's draining, it's demoralizing, it's frightening, not always, but it can feel that way when we're deep in the middle of it. We talk to fill the void and the uncertainty. Void, Marlon Brando, a quiet actor if there ever was one, once said, is terrifying to most people. It is almost as if we are assaulted by silence or confronted by it, particularly if we've allowed our ego to lie to us over the years. Which is so damaging for one reason. The greatest work in art comes from wrestling with the void, facing it instead of scrambling to make it go away. The question is, when faced with your particular challenge, whether it is researching in a new field, starting a business, producing a film, securing a mentor, advancing an important cause, do you seek the respite of talk or do you face the struggle head-on? Think about it. A voice of a generation doesn't call itself that. In fact, when you think about it, you realize just how little these voices seem to talk. It's a song, it's a speech, it's a book, the volume of work may be light, but what's inside it is concentrated and impactful. They work quietly in the corner. They turn their inner turmoil into product, and eventually to stillness. They ignore the impulse to seek recognition before they act. They don't talk much, or mind the feeling that others, out there in public and enjoying the limelight, are somehow getting the better end of the deal. They're too busy working to do anything else. When they do talk, it's earned. The only relationship between work and chatter is that one kills the other. Let the others slap each other on the back while you're back in the lab or the gym or pounding the pavement. Plug that hole, that one, right in the middle of your face, that can drain you of your vital life force. Watch what happens. Watch how much better you get. To be or to do. In this formative period, the soul is unsoiled by warfare with the world. It lies, like a block of pure, uncut Parian marble, ready to be fashioned into what? One of the most influential strategists and practitioners in modern warfare is someone most people have never heard of. His name was John Boyd. He was a truly great fighter pilot, but an even better teacher and thinker. After flying in Korea, he became the lead instructor at the elite fighter weapons school at Nellis Air Force Base. He was known as 42nd Boyd, meaning that he could defeat any opponent, from any position, in less than 40 seconds. A few years later, he was quietly summoned to the Pentagon, where his real work began. In one sense, the fact that the average person might not have heard of John Boyd is not unexpected. He never published any books and he wrote only one academic paper. Only a few videos of him survive and he was rarely, if ever, quoted in the media. Despite nearly 30 years of impeccable service, Boyd wasn't promoted above the rank of colonel. On the other hand, his theories transformed maneuver warfare in almost every branch of the armed forces, not just in his own lifetime but even more so after. The F-15 and F-16 fighter jets, which reinvented modern military aircraft, were his pet projects. His primary influence was as an advisor. Through legendary briefings he taught and instructed nearly every major military thinker in a generation. His input on the war plans for Operation Desert Shield came in a series of direct meetings with the Secretary of Defense, not through public or official policy input. His primary means of effecting change was through the collection of pupils he mentored, protected, taught, and inspired. There are no military bases named after him. No battleships. He retired assuming that he'd be forgotten, and without much more than a small apartment and a pension to his name. He almost certainly had more enemies than friends. This unusual path, what if it were deliberate? What if it made him more influential? How crazy would that be? In fact, Boyd was simply living the exact lesson he tried to teach each promising young acolyte who came under his wing, who he sensed had the potential to be something different. The rising stars he taught probably have a lot in common with us. The speech Boyd gave to a protege in 1973 makes this clear. Sensing what he knew to be a critical inflection point in the life of the young officer, Boyd called him in for a meeting. Like many high achievers, the soldier was insecure and impressionable. He wanted to be promoted and he wanted to do well. He was a leaf that could be blown in any direction and Boyd knew it. So he heard a speech that day that Boyd would give again and again, until it became a tradition and a rite of passage for a generation of transformative military leaders. "Tiger, one day you will come to a fork in the road," Boyd said to him, "and you're going to have to make a decision about which direction you want to go." Using his hands to illustrate, Boyd marked off these two directions. If you go that way, you can be somebody. You will have to make compromises and you will have to turn your back on your friends. But you will be a member of the club and you will get promoted and you will get good assignments. Then Boyd paused to make the alternative clear. Or, he said, you can go that way and you can do something for your country and for your Air Force and for yourself. If you decide you want to do something, you may not get promoted and you may not get the good assignments and you certainly will not be a favorite of your superiors. But you won't have to compromise yourself. You will be true to your friends and to yourself. And your work might make a difference. To be somebody or to do something. In life there is often a roll call. That's when you will have to make a decision. And then Boyd concluded with words that would guide that young man and many of his peers for the rest of their lives. To be or to do? Which way will you go? Whatever we seek to do in life, reality soon intrudes on our youthful idealism. This reality comes in many names and forms. Incentives, commitments, recognition, and politics. In every case, they can quickly redirect us from doing to being, from earning to pretending. Ego aids in that deception every step of the way. It's why Boyd wanted young people to see that if we are not careful, we can very easily find ourselves corrupted by the very occupation we wish to serve. How do you prevent derailment? Well, often we fall in love with an image of what success looks like. In Boyd's world, the number of stars on your shoulder or the nature of your appointment or its location could easily be confused as a proxy for real accomplishment. For other people, it's their job title, the business school they went to, the number of assistants they have, the location of their parking space, the grants they earn, their access to the CEO, the size of their paycheck, or the number of fans they have. Appearances are deceiving. Having authority is not the same as being an authority. Having the right and being right are not the same either. Being promoted doesn't necessarily mean you're doing good work, and it doesn't mean you are worthy of promotion. They call it failing upward in such bureaucracies. Impressing people is utterly different from being truly impressive. So who are you with? Which side will you choose? This is the roll call that life puts before us. Boyd had another exercise. Visiting with or speaking to groups of Air Force officers, he'd write on the chalkboard in big letters the words, duty, honor, country. Then he would cross those words out and replace them with 3 others, pride, power, greed. His point was that many of the systems and structures in the military, the ones that soldiers navigate in order to get ahead, can corrupt the very values they set out to serve. There's a quip from the historian Will Durant, that a nation is born stoic and dies Epicurean. That's the sad truth Boyd was illustrating, how positive virtues turn sour. How many times have we seen this played out in our own short lives, in sports, in relationships, or projects or people that we care deeply about? This is what the ego does. It crosses out what matters and replaces it with what doesn't. A lot of people want to change the world, and it's good that they do. You want to be the best at what you do. Nobody wants to just be an empty suit. But in practical terms, which of the 3 words Boyd wrote on the chalkboard are going to get you there? Which are you practicing now? What's fueling you? The choice that Boyd puts in front of us comes down to purpose. What is your purpose? What are you here to do? Because purpose helps you answer the question, to be or to do, quite easily. If what matters is you, your reputation, your inclusion, your personal ease of life, your path is clear. Tell people what they want to hear. Seek attention over the quiet but important work. Say yes to promotions and generally follow the track that talented people take in the industry or field you've chosen. Pay your dues, check the boxes, put in your time, and leave things essentially as they are. Chase your fame, your salary, your title, and enjoy them as they come. A man is worked upon by what he works on, Frederick Douglass once said. He would know. He'd been a slave, and he saw what it did to everyone involved, including the slaveholders themselves. Once a free man, he saw that the choices people made about their careers and their lives had the same effect. What you choose to do with your time and what you choose to do for money works on you. The egocentric path requires, as Boyd knew, many compromises. If your purpose is something larger than you, to accomplish something, to prove something to yourself, then suddenly everything becomes both easier and more difficult. Easier in the sense that you know now what it is you need to do and what is important to you. The other choices wash away, as they aren't really choices at all. They're distractions. It's about the doing, not the recognition. Easier in the sense that you don't need to compromise. Harder because each opportunity, no matter how gratifying or rewarding, must be evaluated along strict guidelines. Does this help me do what I have set out to do? Does this allow me to do what I need to do? Am I being selfish or selfless? In this course, it is not, who do I want to be in life? But, what is it that I want to accomplish in life? Setting aside selfish interest, it asks, what calling does it serve? What principles govern my choices? Do I want to be like everyone else, or do I want to do something different? In other words, it's harder because everything can seem like a compromise. Although it's never too late, the earlier you ask yourself these questions, the better. Boyd undeniably changed and improved his field in a way that almost no other theorist has since Sun Tzu or von Clausewitz. He was known as Genghis Khan for the way he never let obstacles or opponents stop him from what he needed to do. His choices were not without their costs. He was also known as the Ghetto Colonel because of his frugal lifestyle. He died with a drawer full of thousands of dollars in uncashed expense checks from private contractors, which he equated with bribes. That he never advanced above colonel was not his doing. He was repeatedly held back for promotions. He was forgotten by history as a punishment for the work he did. Think about this the next time you start to feel entitled, the next time you conflate fame and the American dream. Think about how you might measure up to a great man like that. Think about this the next time you face that choice. Do I need this? Or is it really about ego? Are you ready to make the right decision? Or do the prizes still glitter off in the distance? To be or to do, life is a constant roll call. Become a student. Let no man's ghost come back to say my training let me down. In April in the early 1980s, a single day became one guitarist's nightmare and became another's dream and dream job. Without notice, members of the underground metal band Metallica assembled before a planned recording session in a decrepit warehouse in New York and informed their guitarist Dave Mustaine he was being thrown out of the group. With few words, they handed him a bus ticket back to San Francisco. That same day, a decent young guitarist, Kirk Hammett, barely in his 20s and member of a band called Exodus, was given the job. Thrown right into a new life, he performed his first show with the band a few days later. One would assume that this was the moment Hammett had been waiting for his whole life. Indeed it was. Though only known in small circles at the time, Metallica was a band that seemed destined to go places. Their music had already begun to push the boundaries of the genre of thrash metal, and cult stardom had already begun. Within a few short years, it would be one of the biggest bands in the world, eventually selling more than 100 million albums. It was around this time that Kirk came to what must have been a humbling realization, that despite his years of playing and being invited to join Metallica, he wasn't as good as he'd like to be. At his home in San Francisco, he looked for a guitar teacher. In other words, despite joining his dream group and quite literally turning professional, Kirk insisted that he needed more instruction, that he was still a student. The teacher he sought out had a reputation for being a teacher's teacher and for working with musical prodigies like Steve Vai. Joe Satriani, the man Hammett chose as his instructor, would himself go on to become known as one of the best guitar players of all time and sell more than 10 million records of his unique, virtuosic music. Teaching out of a small music shop in Berkeley, Satriani's playing style made him an unusual choice for Hammett. That was the point. Kirk wanted to learn what he didn't know, to firm up his understanding of the fundamentals so that he might continue exploring this new genre of music he now had a chance to pursue. Satriani makes it clear where Hammett was lacking. It wasn't talent, certainly. The main thing with Kirk was he was a really good guitar player when he walked in the door. He was already playing lead guitar. He was already shredding. He had a great right hand, he knew most of his chords, he just didn't learn how to play in an environment where he learned all the names and how to connect everything together. That didn't mean that their sessions were some sort of fun study group. In fact, Satriani explained that what separated Hammett from the others was his willingness to endure the type of instruction they wouldn't. He was a good student. Many of his friends and contemporaries would storm out complaining, thinking I was too harsh a teacher. Satriani's system was clear, that there would be weekly lessons, that these lessons must be learned, and if they weren't, that Hammett was wasting everyone's time and needn't bother to come back. So for the next 2 years Kirk did as Satriani required, returning every week for objective feedback, judgment, and drilling in technique and musical theory for the instrument he would soon be playing in front of thousands, then tens of thousands, and then literally hundreds of thousands of people. Even after that 2-year study period, he would bring to Satriani licks and riffs he'd been working on with the band, and learn to pare down the instinct for more, and hone his ability to do more with fewer notes, and to focus on feeling those notes and expressing them accordingly. Each time, he improved as a player and as an artist. The power of being a student is not just that it is an extended period of instruction, it also places the ego and ambition in someone else's hands. There is a sort of ego ceiling imposed. One knows that he is not better than the master he apprentices under. Not even close. You defer to them, you subsume yourself. You cannot fake or bullshit them. An education can't be hacked. There are no shortcuts besides hacking it every single day. If you don't, they drop you. We don't like thinking that someone is better than us, or that we have a lot left to learn. We want to be done. We want to be ready. We're busy and overburdened. For this reason, updating your appraisal of your talents in a downward direction is one of the most difficult things to do in life, but it is almost always a component of mastery. The pretense of knowledge is our most dangerous vice, because it prevents us from getting any better. Studious self-assessment is the antidote. The result, no matter what your musical tastes happen to be, was that Hammett became one of the great metal guitarists in the world, taking thrash metal from an underground movement into a thriving global musical genre. Not only that, but from those lessons, Satriani honed his own technique and became much better himself. Both the student and the teacher would go on to fill stadiums and remake the musical landscape. The mixed martial arts pioneer and multi-title champion Frank Shamrock has a system he trains fighters in that he calls plus, minus, and equal. Each fighter, to become great, he said, needs to have someone better that they can learn from, someone lesser who they can teach, and someone equal that they can challenge themselves against. The purpose of Shamrock's formula is simple: to get real and continuous feedback about what they know and what they don't know from every angle. It purges out the ego that puffs us up, the fear that makes us doubt ourselves, and any laziness that might make us want to coast. As Shamrock observed, false ideas about yourself destroy you. For me, I always stay a student. That's what martial arts are about, and you have to use that humility as a tool. You put yourself beneath someone you trust. This begins by accepting that others know more than you and that you can benefit from their knowledge, and then seeking them out and knocking down the illusions you have about yourself. The need for a student mindset doesn't stop with fighting or music. A scientist must know the core principles of science and the discoveries occurring on the cutting edge. A philosopher must know deeply and also know how little they know, as Socrates did. A writer must be versed in the canon and read and be challenged by her contemporaries too. A historian must know ancient and modern history, as well as their specialty. Professional athletes have teams of coaches, and even powerful politicians have advisors and mentors. But to become great and to stay great, they must all know what came before, what is going on now, and what comes next. They must internalize the fundamentals of their domain and what surrounds them, without ossifying or becoming stuck in time. They must be always learning. We must all become our own teachers, tutors, and critics. Think about what Hammett could have done, what we might have done in his position were we to suddenly find ourselves a rock star, or a soon-to-rock star in our chosen field. The temptation is to think, I've made it. I've arrived. They tossed the other guy because he's not as good as I am. They chose me because I have what it takes. Had he done that, we'd probably have never heard of him or the band. There are, after all, plenty of forgotten metal groups from the 1980s. A true student is like a sponge, absorbing what goes on around him, filtering it, latching on to what he can hold. A student is self-critical and self-motivated, always trying to improve his understanding so that he can move on to the next topic, the next challenge. A real student is also his own teacher and his own critic. There is no room for ego there. Take fighting as an example again, where self-awareness is particularly crucial because opponents are constantly looking to match strength against weakness. If a fighter is not capable of learning and practicing every day, if he is not relentlessly looking for areas of improvement, examining his own shortcomings, and finding new techniques to borrow from peers and opponents, he will be broken down and destroyed. It is not all that different for the rest of us. Are we not fighting for or against something? Do you think you are the only one who hopes to achieve your goal? You can't possibly believe you're the only one reaching for that brass ring. It tends to surprise people how humble aspiring greats seem to have been. What do you mean they weren't aggressive, entitled, aware of their own greatness or their destiny? The reality is that, though they were confident, the act of being an eternal student kept these men and women humble. It is impossible to learn that which one thinks one already knows, Epictetus says. You can't learn if you think you already know. You will not find the answers if you're too conceited and self-assured to ask the questions. You cannot get better if you're convinced you are the best. The art of taking feedback is such a crucial skill in life, particularly harsh and critical feedback. We not only need to take this harsh feedback, but actively solicit it, labor to seek out the negative precisely when our friends and family and brain are telling us that we're doing great. The ego avoids such feedback at all costs, however. Who wants to remand themselves to remedial training? It thinks it already knows how and who we are, that is, it thinks we are spectacular, perfect, genius, truly innovative. It dislikes reality and prefers its own assessment. Ego doesn't allow for proper incubation either. To become what we ultimately hope to become often takes long periods of obscurity, of sitting and wrestling with some topic or paradox. Humility is what keeps us there, concerned that we don't know enough and that we must continue to study. Ego rushes to the end, rationalizes that patience is for losers, wrongly seeing it as a weakness, and assumes that we're good enough to give our talents a go in the world. As we sit down to proof our work, as we make our first elevator pitch, prepare to open our first shop, as we stare out into the dress rehearsal audience, ego is the enemy, giving us wicked feedback, disconnected from reality. It's defensive, precisely when we cannot afford to be defensive. It blocks us from improving by telling us that we don't need to improve. Then we wonder why we don't get the results we want, why others are better, and why their success is more lasting. Today, books are cheaper than ever. Courses are free. Access to teachers is no longer a barrier. Technology has done away with that. There is no excuse for not getting your education, and because the information we have before us is so vast, there is no excuse for ever ending that process either. Our teachers in life are not only those we pay, as Hammett paid Satriani, nor are they necessarily part of some training dojo, like it is for Shamrock. Many of the best teachers are free. They volunteer because, like you, they once were young and had the same goals you do. Many don't even know they are teaching, they are simply exemplars, or even historical figures whose lessons survive in books and essays. But ego makes us so hard-headed and hostile to feedback that it drives them away or puts them beyond our reach. It's why the old proverb says, "When student is ready, the teacher appears." Don't be passionate. You seem to want that vivida vis animi which spurs and excites most young men to please, to shine, to excel. Without the desire and the pains necessary to be considerable, depend upon it, you never can be so. Passion, it's all about passion. Find your passion. Live passionately. Inspire the world with your passion. People go to Burning Man to find passion, to be around passion, to rekindle their passion. Same goes for TED and the now enormous South by Southwest and 1,000 other events, retreats, and summits, all fueled by what they claim to be life's most important force. Here's what those same people haven't told you. Your passion may be the very thing holding you back from power or influence or accomplishment. Because just as often we fail with no because of passion. Early on in her ascendant political career, a visitor once spoke of Eleanor Roosevelt's passionate interest in a piece of social legislation. The person had meant it as a compliment. But Eleanor's response is illustrative. Yes, she did support the cause, she said. But I hardly think the word passionate applies to me. As a genteel, accomplished, and patient woman born while the embers of the quiet Victorian virtues were still warm, Roosevelt was above passion. She had purpose. She had direction. She wasn't driven by passion, but by reason. George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld, on the other hand, were passionate about Iraq. Christopher McCandless was bursting with passion as he headed into the wild. So was Robert Falcon Scott as he set out to explore the Arctic, bitten as he was with the pole mania, as were many climbers of the tragic 1996 Everest climb, momentarily struck with what psychologists now call goalodacy. The inventor and investors of the Segway believed they had a world-changing innovation on their hands and put everything into evangelizing it. That all of these talented, smart individuals were fervent believers in what they sought to do is without dispute. It's also clear that they were also unprepared and incapable of grasping the objections and real concerns of everyone else around them. The same is true for countless entrepreneurs, authors, chefs, business owners, politicians, and designers that you've never heard of and never will hear of because they sunk their own ships before they'd hardly left the harbor. Like every other dilettante, they had passion and lacked something else. To be clear, I'm not talking about caring. I'm talking about passion of a different sort, unbridled enthusiasm, our willingness to pounce on what's in front of us with the full measure of our zeal, the bundle of energy that our teachers and gurus have assured us is our most important asset. It is that burning, unquenchable desire to start or to achieve some vague, ambitious, and distant goal. This seemingly innocuous motivation is so far from the right track it hurts. Remember, zealot is just a nice way to say crazy person. A young basketball player named Louis Alcindor Jr., who won 3 national championships with John Wooden at UCLA, used one word to describe the style of his famous coach: dispassionate. As in not passionate. Wooden wasn't about rah-rah speeches or inspiration. He saw those extra emotions as a burden. Instead, his philosophy was about being in control and doing your job and never being passion's slave. The player who learned that lesson from Wooden would later change his name to one you remember better: Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. No one would describe Eleanor Roosevelt or John Wooden or his notoriously quiet player Kareem as apathetic. They wouldn't have said they were frenetic or zealous either. Roosevelt, one of the most powerful and influential female activists in history and certainly America's most important First Lady, was known primarily for her grace, her poise, and her sense of direction. Wooden won 10 titles in 12 years, including 7 in a row, because he developed a system for winning and worked with his players to follow it. Neither of them were driven by excitement, nor were they bodies in constant motion. Instead, it took them years to become the person they became known as. It was a process of accumulation. In our endeavors, we will face complex problems, often in situations we've never faced before. Opportunities are not usually deep, virgin pools that require courage and boldness to dive into, but instead are obscured, dusted over, blocked by various forms of resistance. What is really called for in these circumstances is clarity, deliberateness, and methodological determination. But too often we proceed like this. A flash of inspiration. I want to do the best and biggest ever. Be the youngest. The only one to. The firstest with the mostest. The advice. Okay, well, here's what you'll need to do step by step to accomplish it. The reality, we hear what we want to hear. We do what we feel like doing, and despite being incredibly busy and working very hard, we accomplish very little. Or worse, find ourselves in a mess we never anticipated. Because we only seem to hear about the passion of successful people, we forget that failures shared the same trait. We don't conceive of the consequences until we look at their trajectory. With the segue, the inventor and investors wrongly assumed a demand much greater than ever existed. With the run-up to the war in Iraq, its proponents ignored objections and negative feedback because they conflicted with what they so deeply needed to believe. The tragic end to the Into the Wild story is the result of youthful naivete and a lack of preparation. With Robert Falcon Scott, it was overconfidence and zeal without consideration of the real dangers. We imagine Napoleon was brimming with passion as he contemplated the invasion of Russia and only finally became free of it as he limped home with a fraction of the men he'd so confidently left with. In many more examples we see the same mistakes. Overinvesting, underinvesting, acting before someone is really ready, breaking things that require delicacy, not so much malice as the drunkenness of passion. Passion typically masks a weakness. Its breathlessness and impetuousness and franticness are poor substitutes for discipline, for mastery, for strength and purpose and perseverance. You need to be able to spot this in others and in yourself, because while the origins of passion may be earnest and good, its effects are comical and then monstrous. Passion is seen in those who can tell you in great detail who they intend to become and what their success will be like. They might even be able to tell you specifically when they intend to achieve it or describe to you legitimate and sincere worries they have about the burdens of such accomplishments. They can tell you all the things they're going to do, or have even begun, but they cannot show you their progress. Because there rarely is any. How can someone be busy and not accomplish anything? Well, that's the passion paradox. If the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results, then passion is a form of mental retardation, deliberately blunting our most critical cognitive functions. The waste is often appalling in retrospect. The best years of our life burned out like a pair of spinning tires against the asphalt. Dogs, God bless them, are passionate. As numerous squirrels, birds, boxes, blankets, and toys can tell you, they do not accomplish most of what they set out to do. A dog has an advantage in all this. A graciously short-term memory that keeps at bay the creeping sense of futility and impotence. Reality for us humans, on the other hand, has no reason to be sensitive to the illusions we operate under. Eventually it will intrude. What humans require in our ascent is purpose and realism. Purpose, you could say, is like passion with boundaries. Realism is detachment and perspective. When we are young, or when our cause is young, we feel so intensely passion, like our hormones run strongest in youth, that it seems wrong to take it slow. This is just our impatience. This is our inability to see that burning ourselves out or blowing ourselves up isn't going to hurry the journey along. Passion is about. Purpose is to and for. I must do. I was put here to accomplish. I am willing to endure for the sake of this. Actually, purpose de-emphasizes the I. Purpose is about pursuing something outside yourself as opposed to pleasuring yourself. More than purpose, we also need realism. Where do we start? What do we do first? What do we do right now? How are we sure that what we're doing is moving us forward? What are we benchmarking ourselves against? Great passions are maladies without hope, as Goethe once said, which is why a deliberate, purposeful person operates on a different level, beyond the sway or the sickness. They hire professionals and use them. They ask questions, they ask what could go wrong, they ask for examples. They plan for contingencies. Then they are off to the races. Usually they get started with small steps, complete them, and look for feedback on how the next set can be better. They lock in gains, and then get better as they go, often leveraging those gains to grow exponentially rather than arithmetically. Is an iterative approach less exciting than manifestos, epiphanies, flying across the country to surprise someone, or sending 4,000-word stream of consciousness emails in the middle of the night? Of course. Is it less glamorous and bold than going all in and maxing out your credit cards because you believe in yourself? Absolutely. Same goes for the spreadsheets, the meetings, the trips, the phone calls, software, tools, and internal systems, and every how-to article ever written about them and the routines of famous people. Passion is form over function. Purpose is function, function, function. The critical work that you want to do will require your deliberation and consideration. Not passion. Not naivete. It'd be far better if you were intimidated by what lies ahead, humbled by its magnitude, and determined to see it through regardless. Leave passion for the amateurs. Make it about what you feel you must do and say, not what you care about and wish to be. Remembez Talleyrand et épigrammes fort diplomat, surtout pas trop de zèle. Then you will do great things. Then you will stop being your old, good-intentioned, but ineffective self. Follow the canvas strategy. Great men have almost always shown themselves as ready to obey as they afterwards proved able to command. In the Roman system of art and science, there existed a concept for which we have only a partial analog. Successful businessmen, politicians, or rich playboys would subsidize a number of writers, thinkers, artists, and performers. More than just being paid to produce works of art, these artists performed a number of tasks in exchange for protection, food, and gifts. One of the roles was that of an anteambulo, literally meaning one who clears the path. An anteambulo proceeded in front of his patron anywhere they traveled in Rome, making way, communicating messages, and generally making the patron's life easier. The famous epigrammist Martial fulfilled this role for many years, serving for a time under the patron Mela, a wealthy businessman and brother of the Stoic philosopher and political advisor Seneca. Born without a rich family, Martial also served under another businessman named Petilius. As a young writer, he spent most of his day traveling from the home of one rich patron to another, providing services, paying his respects, and receiving small token payments and favors in return. Here's the problem. Like most of us with our internships and entry-level positions, Martial absolutely hated every minute of it. He seemed to believe that this system somehow made him a slave. Aspiring to live like some country squire, like the patrons he serviced, Martial wanted money and an estate that was all his own. There, he dreamed he could finally produce his works in peace and independence. As a result, his writing often drags with a hatred and bitterness about Rome's upper crust, from which he believed he was cruelly shunted aside. For all his impotent rage, what Martial couldn't see was that it was his unique position as an outsider to society that gave him such fascinating insight into Roman culture that it survives to this day. Instead of being pained by such a system, what if he'd been able to come to terms with it? What if, he could have appreciated the opportunities it offered? Nope. It seemed to eat him up inside instead. It's a common attitude that transcends generations and societies. The angry, unappreciated genius is forced to do stuff she doesn't like, for people she doesn't respect, as she makes her way in the world. How dare they force me to grovel like this? The injustice. The waste. We see it in recent lawsuits in which interns sue their employers for pay. We see kids more willing to live at home with their parents than to submit to something they're overqualified to work for. We see it in an inability to meet anyone else on their terms, an unwillingness to take a step back in order to potentially take several steps forward. I will not let them get one over on me. I'd rather we both have nothing instead. It's worth taking a look at the supposed indignities of serving someone else. Because in reality, not only is the apprentice model responsible for some of the greatest art in the history of the world, everyone from Michelangelo to Leonardo da Vinci to Benjamin Franklin has been forced to navigate such a system, but if you're going to be the big deal you think you are going to be, isn't this a rather trivial temporary imposition? When someone gets his first job or joins a new organization, he's often given this advice. Make other people look good and you will do well. Keep your head down, they say, and serve your boss. Naturally, this is not what the kid who was chosen over all the other kids for the position wants to hear. It's not what a Harvard grad expects. After all, they got that degree precisely to avoid this supposed indignity. Let's flip it around so it doesn't seem so demeaning. It's not about kissing ass. It's not about making someone look good. It's about providing the support so that others can be good. The better wording for the advice is this: find canvases for other people to paint on. Be an antiambulo. Clear the path for the people above you and you will eventually create a path for yourself. When you are just starting out, we can be sure of a few fundamental realities. 1. You're not nearly as good or as important as you think you are. 2. You have an attitude that needs to be readjusted. 3. Most of what you think you know or most of what you learned in books or in school is out of date or wrong. There's one fabulous way to work all that out of your system. Attach yourself to people and organizations who are already successful and subsume your identity into theirs and move both forward simultaneously. It's certainly more glamorous to pursue your own glory, though hardly as effective. Obeisance is the way forward. That's the other effect of this attitude. It reduces your ego at a critical time in your career, letting you absorb everything you can without the obstructions that block others' vision and progress. No one is endorsing sycophancy. Instead, it's about seeing what goes on from the inside and looking for opportunities for someone other than yourself. Remember that antiambulo means clearing the path, finding the direction someone already intended to head and helping them pack, freeing them up to focus on their strengths. In fact, making things better rather than simply looking as if you are. Many people know of Benjamin Franklin's famous pseudonymous letters written under names like Silence Dogwood. What a clever young prodigy, they think, and miss the most impressive part entirely. Franklin wrote those letters, submitted them by sliding them under the print shop door, and received absolutely no credit for them until much later in his life. In fact, it was his brother, the owner, who profited from their immense popularity, regularly running them on the front page of his newspaper. Franklin was playing the long game, though, learning how public opinion worked, generating awareness of what he believed in, crafting his style and tone and wit. It was a strategy he used time and again over his career, once even publishing in his competitor's paper in order to undermine a third competitor, for Franklin saw the constant benefit in making other people look good and letting them take credit for your ideas. Bill Belichick, the 4-time Super Bowl-winning head coach of the New England Patriots, made his way up the ranks of the NFL by loving and mastering the one part of the job that coaches disliked at the time: analyzing film. His first job in professional football for the Baltimore Colts was one he volunteered to take without pay, and his insights, which provided ammunition and critical strategies for the game, were attributed exclusively to the more senior coaches. He thrived on what was considered grunt work, asked for it, and strove to become the best at precisely what others thought they were too good for. He was like a sponge, taking it all in, listening to everything, one coach said. You gave him an assignment and he disappeared into a room and you didn't see him again until it was done, and then he wanted to do more, said another. As you can guess, Belichick started getting paid very soon. Before that, as a young high school player, he was so knowledgeable about the game that he functioned as a sort of assistant coach even while playing the game. Belichick's father, himself an assistant football coach for Navy, taught him a critical lesson in football politics, that if he wanted to give his coach feedback or question a decision, he needed to do it in private and self-effacingly so as not to offend his superior. He learned how to be a rising star without threatening or alienating anyone. In other words, he had mastered the canvas strategy. You can see how easily entitlement and a sense of superiority would have made the accomplishments of either of these men impossible. Franklin would never have been published if he'd prioritized credit over creative expression. Indeed, when his brother found out, he literally beat him out of jealousy and anger. Belichick would have pissed off his coach and then probably been benched if he had one-upped him in public. He certainly wouldn't have taken his first job for free, and he wouldn't have sat through thousands of hours of film if he cared about status. Greatness comes from humble beginnings. It comes from grunt work. It means you're the least important person in the room until you change that with results. There is an old saying, say little, do much. What we really ought to do is update and apply a version of that to our early approach. Be lesser, do more. Imagine if for every person you met, you thought of some way to help them, something you could do for them, and you looked at it in a way that entirely benefited them and not you. The cumulative effect this would have over time would be profound. You'd learn a great deal by solving diverse problems. You'd develop a reputation for being indispensable. You'd have countless new relationships. You'd have an enormous bank of favors to call upon down the road. That's what the canvas strategy is about, helping yourself by helping others. Making a concerted effort to trade your short-term gratification for a longer-term payoff. Whereas everyone else wants to get credit and be respected, you can forget credit. You can forget it so hard that you're glad when others get it instead of you. That was your aim, after all. Let the others take their credit on credit, while you defer and earn interest on the principal. The strategy part of it is the hardest. It's easy to be bitter, like Marshall. To hate even the thought of subservience. To despise those who have more means, more experience, or more status than you. To tell yourself that every second not spent doing your work, or working on yourself, is a waste of your gift. To insist, I will not be demeaned like this. Once we fight this emotional and egotistical impulse, the canvas strategy is easy. The iterations are endless. Maybe it's coming up with ideas to hand over to your boss. Find people, thinkers, up-and-comers to introduce them to each other. Cross wires to create new sparks. Find what nobody else wants to do and do it. Find inefficiencies and waste and redundancies. Identify leaks and patches to free up resources for new areas. Produce more than everyone else and give your ideas away. In other words, discover opportunities to promote their creativity, find outlets and people for collaboration, and eliminate distractions that hinder their progress and focus. It is a rewarding and infinitely scalable power strategy. Consider each one an investment in relationships and in your own development. The canvas strategy is there for you at any time. There is no expiration date on it either. It's one of the few that age does not limit, on either side, young or old. You can start at any time, before you have a job, before you're hired and while you're doing something else, or if you're starting something new or find yourself inside an organization without strong allies or support. You may even find that there's no reason to ever stop doing it, even once you've graduated to heading your own projects. Let it become natural and permanent. Let others apply it to you while you're too busy applying it to those above you. Because if you pick up this mantle once, you'll see what most people's egos prevent them from appreciating. The person who clears the path ultimately controls its direction, just as the canvas shapes the painting. Restrain yourself. I have observed that those who have accomplished the greatest results are those who keep under the body, are those who never grow excited or lose self-control, but are always calm, self-possessed, patient, and polite. People who knew Jackie Robinson as a young man probably wouldn't have predicted that they'd one day see him become the first black player in Major League Baseball. Not that he wasn't talented or that the idea of eventually integrating white baseball was inconceivable, it's that he wasn't exactly known for his restraint and poise. As a teenager, Robinson ran with a small gang of friends who regularly found themselves in trouble with local police. He challenged a fellow student to a fight at a junior college picnic for using a slur. In a basketball game, he surreptitiously struck a hard-fouling white opponent with the ball so forcefully that the kid bled everywhere. He was arrested more than once for arguing with and challenging police, who he felt treated him unfairly. Before he started at UCLA, he spent the night in jail for nearly fighting a white man who'd insulted his friends. And in addition to rumors of inciting protests against racism, Jackie Robinson effectively ended his career as a military officer at Camp Hood in 1944 when a bus driver attempted to force him to sit in the back in spite of laws that forbade segregation on base buses. By arguing and cursing at the driver and then directly challenging his commanding officer after the fracas, Jackie set in motion a series of events that led to a court-martial. Despite being acquitted, he was discharged shortly afterward. It's not just understandable and human that he did this, it was probably the right thing to do. Why should he let anyone else treat him that way? No one should have to stand for that. Except sometimes they do. Are there not goals so important that we'd put up with anything to achieve them? When Branch Rickey, the manager and owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, scouted Jackie to potentially become the first black player in baseball, he had one question. Do you have the guts? I'm looking, Rickey told him, for a ball player with the guts not to fight back. In fact, in their famous meeting, Rickey play-acted the abuse that Robinson was likely to experience if he accepted Rickey's challenge: a hotel clerk refusing him a room, a rude waiter in a restaurant, an opponent shouting slurs. This, Robinson assured him, he was ready to handle. There were plenty of players Rickey could have gone with. But he needed one who wouldn't let his ego block him from seeing the bigger picture. As he started in baseball's farm system, then in the pros, Robinson faced more than just slights from service staff or reticent players. There was an aggressive, coordinated campaign to libel, boo, provoke, freeze out, attack, maim, or even kill. In his career, he was hit by more than 72 pitches, nearly had his Achilles tendon taken out by players who aimed their spikes at him, and that says nothing of the calls he was cheated out of and the breaks of the game that didn't go his way. Yet Jackie Robinson held to his unwritten pact with Rickey, never giving in to explosive anger, however deserved. In fact, in 9 years in the league, he never hit another player with his fist. Athletes seem spoiled and hot-headed to us today, but we have no concept of what the leagues were like then. In 1956, Ted Williams, one of the most revered and respected players in the history of the game, was once caught spitting at his fans. As a white player, he could not only get away with this, he later told reporters, "I'm not a bit sorry for what I did. I was right and I'd spit again at the same people who booed me today. Nobody's going to stop me from spitting." For a black player, this sort of behavior would have been not only unthinkable but short-sighted beyond comprehension. Robinson had no such freedom. It would have ended not only his career, but set back his grand experiment for a generation. Jackie's path called for him to put aside both his ego and in some respects his basic sense of fairness and rights as a human being. Early in his career, the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies, Ben Chapman, was particularly brutal in his taunting during a game. "They're waiting for you in the jungles, black boy," he yelled over and over. "We don't want you here, nigger." Not only did Jackie not respond, despite, as he later wrote, wanting to grab one of those white sons of bitches and smash his teeth in with my despised black fist. A month later, he agreed to take a friendly photo with Chapman to help save the man's job. The thought of posing with such an asshole, even 60 years removed, almost turns the stomach. Robinson called it one of the most difficult things he ever did, but he was willing to because it was part of a larger plan. He understood that certain forces were trying to bait him, to ruin him. Knowing what he wanted and needed to do in baseball, it was clear what he would have to tolerate in order to do it. He shouldn't have had to, but he did. Our own path, whatever we aspire to, will in some ways be defined by the amount of nonsense we are willing to deal with. Our humiliations will pale in comparison to Robinson's, but it will still be hard. It will still be tough to keep our self-control. The fighter bis Rutten sometimes writes the letter R on both his hands before fights, for the word rustic, which means relax in Dutch. Getting angry, getting emotional, losing restraint is a recipe for failure in the ring. You cannot, as John Steinbeck once wrote to his editor, temper as a refuge from despair. Your ego will do you no favors here, whether you're struggling with a publisher, with critics, with enemies, or a capricious boss. It doesn't matter that they don't understand or that you know better. It's too early for that. It's too soon. Oh, you went to college? That doesn't mean the world is yours by right. But it was the Ivy League? Well, people are still going to treat you poorly, and they will still yell at you. You have $1 million or a wall full of awards. That doesn't mean anything in the new field you're trying to tackle. It doesn't matter how talented you are, how great your connections are, how much money you have. When you want to do something big and important and meaningful, you will be subjected to treatment ranging from indifference to outright sabotage. Count on it. In this scenario, ego is the absolute opposite of what is needed. Who can afford to be jerked around by impulses, or believe that you're God's gift to humanity, or too important to put up with anything you don't like? Those who have subdued their ego understand that it doesn't degrade you when others treat you poorly, it degrades them. Up ahead there will be slights, dismissals, little fuck yous, one-sided compromises. You'll get yelled at. You'll have to work behind the scenes to salvage what should have been easy. All this will make you angry. This will make you want to fight back. This will make you want to say, I am better than this. I deserve more. Of course, you'll want to throw that in other people's faces. Worse, you'll want to get in other people's faces, people who don't deserve the respect, recognition, or rewards they are getting. In fact, those people will often get perks instead of you. When someone doesn't reckon you with the seriousness that you'd like, the impulse is to correct them. You want to remind them of what they've forgotten. Your ego screams for you to indulge it. Instead, you must do nothing. Take it. Eat it until you're sick. Endure it. Quietly brush it off and work harder. Play the game. Ignore the noise. For the love of God, do not let it distract you. Restraint is a difficult skill but a critical one. You will often be tempted. You will probably even be overcome. No one is perfect with it, but try we must. It is a timeless fact of life that the up-and-coming must endure the abuses of the entrenched. Robinson was 28 when he started with the Dodgers, and he'd already paid plenty of dues in life as both a black man and a soldier. Still, he was forced to do it again. It's a sad fact of life that new talents are regularly missed, and even when recognized, often unappreciated. The reasons always vary, but it's a part of the journey. But you're not able to change the system until after you've made it. In the meantime, you'll have to find some way to make it suit your purposes, even if those purposes are just extra time to develop properly, to learn from others on their dime, to build your base and establish yourself. As Robinson succeeded, after he had proved himself as the Rookie of the Year and as an MVP, and as his spot on the Dodgers was certain, he began to more clearly assert himself and his boundaries as a player and as a man. Having carved out his space, he felt that he could argue with umpires, he could throw his shoulder if he needed to make a player back off or to send a message. No matter how confident and famous Robinson became, he never spit on fans. He never did anything that undermined his legacy. A class act from opening day until the end, Jackie Robinson was not without passion. He had a temper and frustrations like all of us do. But he learned early that the tightrope he walked would tolerate only restraint and had no forgiveness for ego. Honestly, not many paths do. Get out of your head. A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts, so he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusions. It is Holden Caulfield, the self-absorbed boy walking the streets of Manhattan, struggling to adjust to the world. It is a young Arturo Bandini in Los Angeles, alienating every person he meets as he tries to become a famous writer. It is the blue blood Binks Bolling in 1950s uptown New Orleans, trying to escape the everydayness of life. These fictional characters all had something in common. They couldn't get out of their own heads. In J. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. Holden can't stay in school, is petrified of growing up, and wants desperately to get away from it all. In John Fante's Ask the Dust, this young writer doesn't experience the life he is living, he sees it all across a page in a typewriter, wondering if nearly every second of his life is a poem, a play, a story, a news article with him as its main character. In Walker Percy's The Moviegoer, his protagonist, Binks, is addicted to watching movies, preferring an idealized version of life on the screen to his own uncomfortable ennui. It's always dangerous to psychologize a writer based on his work, but these are famously autobiographical novels. When we look at the writers' lives, the facts are clear. Salinger really did suffer from a sort of self-obsession and immaturity that made the world too much for him to bear, driving him from human contact and paralyzing his genius. John Fante struggled to reconcile his enormous ego and insecurity with relative obscurity for most of his career, eventually abandoning his novels for the golf course and Hollywood bars. Only near death, blind with diabetes, was he finally able to get serious again. The Moviegoer, Walker Percy's first book, came only after he'd conquered his almost teenage indolence and existential crisis, which lasted alarmingly into his 40s. How much better could these writers have been had they managed to get through these troubles earlier? How much easier would their lives have been? It's an urgent question they pushed onto their readers with their cautionary characters. Because sadly, this trait, the inability to get out of one's head, is not restricted to fiction. 2,400 years ago, Plato spoke of the type of people who are guilty of feasting on their own thoughts. It was apparently common enough even then to find people who, instead of finding out how something they desire might actually come about, pass that over, so as to avoid tiring deliberations about what's possible. They assume that what they desire is available and proceed to arrange the rest, taking pleasure in thinking through everything they'll do when they have what they want, thereby making their lazy souls even lazier. Real people preferring to live in passionate fiction than in actual reality. The Civil War general George McClellan is the perfect example of this archetype. He was chosen to command the Union forces because he checked all the boxes of what a great general should be. West Point grad, proven in battle, a student of history, of regal bearing, loved by his men. Why did he turn out to be quite possibly the worst Union general, even in a crowded field of incompetent and self-absorbed leaders? Because he could never get out of his own head. He was in love with his vision of himself as the head of a grand army. He could prepare an army for battle like a professional, but when it came to lead one into battle, when the rubber needed to meet the road, troubles arose. He became laughably convinced that the enemy was growing larger and larger. He was convinced of constant threats and intrigues from his political allies. He was convinced that the only way to win the war was with the perfect plan and a single decisive campaign. He was so convinced of all of it that he froze and basically did nothing for months at a time. McClellan was constantly thinking about himself and how wonderful he was doing, congratulating himself for victories not yet won, and more often, horrible defeats he had saved the cause from. When anyone, including his superiors, questioned this comforting fiction, he reacted like a petulant, delusional, vainglorious, and selfish ass. By itself that's insufferable, but it meant another thing. His personality made it impossible to do what he needed to do most, win battles. A historian who fought under McClellan at Antietam later summed it up. His egotism is simply colossal, there is no other word for it. We tend to think that ego equals confidence, which is what we need to be in charge. In fact, it can have the opposite effect. In McClellan's case, it deprived him of the ability to lead. It robbed him of the ability to think that he even needed to act. The repeated opportunities he missed would be laughable were it not for the thousands and thousands of lives they cost. The situation was made worse by the fact that two pious, quiet Southerners, Lee and Stonewall Jackson, with a penchant for taking the initiative, were able to embarrass him with inferior numbers and inferior resources. Which is what happens when leaders get stuck in their own heads. It can happen to us too. The novelist Anne Lamott describes that ego story well. If you are not careful, she warns young writers, station KFKD will play in your head 24 hours a day, non-stop, in stereo. Out of the right speaker in your inner ear will come the endless stream of self-aggrandizement, the recitation of one's specialness, of how much more open and gifted and brilliant and knowing and misunderstood and humble one is. Out of the left speaker will be the rap songs of self-loathing, the lists of all the things one doesn't do well, of all the mistakes one has made today and over an entire lifetime, the doubt, the assertion that everything that one touches turns to shit, that one doesn't do relationships well, that one is in every way a fraud, incapable of selfless love, that one had no talent or insight, and on and on and on. Anyone, particularly the ambitious, can fall prey to this narration, good and bad. It is natural for any young, ambitious person to get excited and swept up by their thoughts and feelings, especially in a world that tells us to keep and promote a personal brand. We're required to tell stories in order to sell our work and our talents, and after enough time, forget where the line is that separates our fictions from reality. Ultimately, this disability will paralyze us, or it will become a wall between us and the information we need to do our jobs, which is largely why McClellan continually fell for flawed intelligence reports he ought to have known were wrong. The idea that his task was relatively straightforward, that he just needed to get started, was almost too easy and too obvious to someone who had thought so much about it all. He's not that different from the rest of us. We're all full of anxieties, doubts, impotence, pains, and sometimes a little tinge of crazy. We're like teenagers in this regard. As the psychologist David L. Kind has famously researched, adolescence is marked by a phenomenon known now as the imaginary audience. Consider a 13-year-old so embarrassed that he misses a week of class, positive that the entire school is thinking and murmuring about some tiny incident that in truth hardly anyone noticed. Or a teenage girl who spends 3 hours in front of the mirror each morning, as if she's about to go on stage. They do this because they're convinced that their every move is being watched with rapt attention by the rest of the world. Even as adults, we're susceptible to this fantasy during a harmless walk down the street. We plug in some headphones and all of a sudden there's a soundtrack. We flip up our jacket collar and consider briefly how cool we must look. We replay the successful meeting we're heading toward in our head. The crowds part as we pass. We're fearless warriors on our way to the top. It's the opening credits montage. It's a scene in a novel. It feels good, so much better than those feelings of doubt and fear and normalness, and so we stay stuck inside our heads instead. That's ego, baby. What successful people do is curb such flights of fancy. They ignore the temptations that might make them feel important or skew their perspective. General George C. Marshall, essentially the opposite of McClellan even though they briefly held the same position a few generations apart, refused to keep a diary during World War II despite the requests of historians and friends. He worried that it would turn his quiet, reflective time into a sort of performance and self-deception. That he might second-guess difficult decisions out of concern for his reputation and future readers and warp his thinking based on how they would look. All of us are susceptible to these obsessions of the mind, whether we run a technology startup or are working our way up the ranks of the corporate hierarchy or have fallen madly in love. The more creative we are, the easier it is to lose the thread that guides us. Our imagination, in many senses an asset, is dangerous when it runs wild. We have to rein our perceptions in. Otherwise, lost in the excitement, how can we accurately predict the future or interpret events? How can we stay hungry and aware? How can we appreciate the present moment? How can we be creative within the realm of practicality? Living clearly and presently takes courage. Don't live in the haze of the abstract, live with the tangible and real, even if, especially if, it's uncomfortable. Be part of what's going on around you. Feast on it, adjust for it. There's no one to perform for. There is just work to be done and lessons to be learned in all that is around us. The danger of early pride. A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. At 18, a rather triumphant Benjamin Franklin returned to visit Boston, the city he'd run away from 7 months before. Full of pride and self-satisfaction, he had a new suit, a watch, and a pocket full of coins that he spread out and showed to everyone he ran into, including his older brother, whom he particularly hoped to impress. All posturing by a boy who was not much more than an employee in a print shop in Philadelphia. In a meeting with Cotton Mather, one of the town's most respected figures, and a former adversary, Franklin quickly illustrated just how ridiculously inflated his young ego had become. Chatting with Mather as they walked down a hallway, Mather suddenly admonished him, "Stoop! Stoop!" Too caught up in his performance, Franklin walked right into a low-ceiling beam. Mather's response was perfect. "Let this be a caution to you not always to hold your head so high," he said wryly. "Stoop, young man, stoop as you go through this world, and you'll miss many hard thumps." Christians believe that pride is a sin because it is a lie. It convinces people that they are better than they are, that they are better than God made them. Pride leads to arrogance and then away from humility and connection with their fellow man. You don't have to be Christian to see the wisdom in this. You need only to care about your career to understand that pride, even in real accomplishments, is a distraction and a deluder. Whom the gods wish to destroy, Cyril Connolly famously said, they first call promising. 2,500 years before that, the elegiac poet Theognis wrote to his friend, "The first thing, Kurnos, which gods bestow on one they would annihilate, is pride." Yet we pick up this mantle on purpose. Pride blunts the very instrument we need to own in order to succeed, our mind. Our ability to learn, to adapt, to be flexible, to build relationships, all of this is dulled by pride. Most dangerously, this tends to happen either early in life or in the process, when we're flushed with beginner's conceit. Only later do you realize that that bump on the head was the least of what was risked. Pride takes a minor accomplishment and makes it feel like a major one. It smiles at our cleverness and genius, as though what we've exhibited was merely a hint of what ought to come. From the start, it drives a wedge between the possessor and reality, subtly and not so subtly changing her perceptions of what something is and what it isn't. It is these strong opinions, only loosely secured by fact or accomplishment, that send us careering toward delusion or worse. Pride and ego say, "I am an entrepreneur because I struck out on my own. I am going to win because I am currently in the lead. I am a writer because I published something. I am rich because I made some money. I am special because I was chosen. I am important because I think I should be." At one time or another, we all indulge this sort of gratifying label-making. Yet every culture seems to produce words of caution against it. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. Don't cook the sauce before catching the fish. The way to cook a rabbit is first to catch a rabbit. Game slaughtered by words cannot be skinned. Punching above your weight is how you get injured. Pride goeth before the fall. Let's call that attitude what it is, fraud. If you're doing the work and putting in the time, you won't need to cheat, you won't need to overcompensate. Pride is a masterful encroacher. John D. Rockefeller, as a young man, practiced a nightly conversation with himself. "Because you have got to start," he'd say aloud or write in his diary, "you think you are quite a merchant. Look out or you will lose your head, go steady." Early in his career, he'd had some success. He'd gotten a good job. He was saving money. He had a few investments. Considering his father had been a drunken swindler, this was no small feat. Rockefeller was on the right track. Understandably, a sort of self-satisfaction with his accomplishments and the trajectory he was heading in began to seep in. In a moment of frustration, he once shouted at a bank officer who refused to lend him money, "Someday I'll be the richest man in the world." Let's count Rockefeller as maybe the only man in the world to say that and then go on to become the richest man in the world. But for every one of him, there are a dozen more delusional assholes who said the exact same thing and genuinely believed it, and then came nowhere close, in part because their pride worked against them and made other people hate them too. All of this was why Rockefeller knew he needed to rein himself in and to privately manage his ego. Night after night he asked himself, "Are you going to be a fool? Are you going to let this money puff you up? Keep your eyes open," he admonished himself. "Don't lose your balance." As he later reflected, "I had a horror of the danger of arrogance. What a pitiful thing it is when a man lets a little temporary success spoil him, warp his judgment, and he forgets what he is." It creates a sort of myopic, onanistic obsession that warps perspective, reality, truth, and the world around us. The childlike little prince in Saint-Exupéry's famous story makes the same observation. lamenting that vain men never hear anything but praise. That's exactly why we can't afford to have it as a translator. Receive feedback, maintain hunger, and chart a proper course in life. Pride dulls these senses. Or in other cases, it tunes up other negative parts of ourselves. Sensitivity, a persecution complex, the ability to make everything about us. As the famous conqueror and warrior Genghis Khan groomed his sons and generals to succeed him later in life, he repeatedly warned them, if you can't swallow your pride, you can't lead. He told them that pride would be harder to subdue than a wild lion. He liked the analogy of a mountain. He would say, even the tallest mountains have animals that, when they stand on it, are higher than the mountain. We tend to be on guard against negativity, against the people who are discouraging us from pursuing our callings or doubting the visions we have for ourselves. This is certainly an obstacle to beware of, though dealing with it is rather simple. What we cultivate less is how to protect ourselves against the validation and gratification that will quickly come our way if we show promise. What we don't protect ourselves against are people and things that make us feel good, or rather, too good. We must prepare for pride and kill it early, or it will kill what we aspire to. We must be on guard against that wild self-confidence and self-obsession. The first product of self-knowledge is humility, Flannery O'Connor once said. This is how we fight the ego, by really knowing ourselves. The question to ask when you feel pride, then, is this: what am I missing right now that a more humble person might see? What am I avoiding or running from with my bluster, franticness, and embellishments? It is far better to ask and answer these questions now, with the stakes still low, than it will be later. It's worth saying, just because you are quiet doesn't mean that you are without pride. Privately thinking you're better than others is still pride. It's still dangerous. That on which you so pride yourself will be your ruin, Montaigne had inscribed on the beam of his ceiling. It's a quote from the playwright Menander, and it ends with, "You who think yourself to be someone." We are still striving, and it is the strivers who should be our peers, not the proud and the accomplished. Without this understanding, pride takes our self-conception and puts it at odds with the reality of our station, which is that we still have so far to go, that there is still so much to be done. After hitting his head and hearing from Mather, Franklin spent a lifetime battling against his pride, because he wanted to do much and understood that pride would make it much harder. Which is why, despite what would be dizzying accomplishments in any era, wealth, fame, power, Franklin never had to experience most of the misfortunes brought upon people by their carrying their heads too high. At the end, this isn't about deferring pride because you don't deserve it yet. It isn't, don't boast about what hasn't happened yet. It is more directly, don't boast. There's nothing in it for you. Work, work, work. The best plan is only good intentions unless it degenerates into work. The painter Edgar Degas, though best known for his beautiful impressionist paintings of dancers, toyed briefly with poetry. As a brilliant and creative mind, the potential for great poems was all there. He could see beauty, he could find inspiration. Yet there are no great Degas poems. There is one famous conversation that might explain why. One day, Degas complained to his friend, the poet Stéphane Mallarmé, about his trouble writing. "I can't manage to say what I want, and yet I'm full of ideas." Mallarmé's response cuts to the bone. "It's not with ideas, my dear Degas, that one makes verse. It's with words, or rather, with work." The distinction between a professional and a dilettante occurs right there, when you accept that having an idea is not enough, that you must work until you are able to recreate your experience effectively in words on the page. As the philosopher and writer Paul Valéry explained in 1938, a poet's function is not to experience the poetic state, that is a private affair. His function is to create it in others. That is, his job is to produce work, to be both a craftsman and an artist, to cultivate a product of labor and industry instead of just a product of the mind. It's here where abstraction meets the road and the real, where we trade thinking and talking for working. You can't build a reputation on what you're going to do, was how Henry Ford put it. The sculptor Nina Holton hit the same note in psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's landmark study on creativity. That germ of an idea, she told him, does not make a sculpture which stands up. It just sits there. So the next stage, of course, is the hard work. The investor and serial entrepreneur Ben Horowitz put it more bluntly: the hard thing isn't setting a big, hairy, audacious goal. The hard thing is laying people off when you miss the big goal. The hard thing isn't dreaming big. The hard thing is waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat when the dream turns into a nightmare. Sure, you get it? You know that all things require work, and that work might be quite difficult. But do you really understand? Do you have any idea just how much work there is going to be? Not work until you get your big break, not work until you make a name for yourself, but work, 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 forever and ever. Is it 10,000 hours or 20,000 hours to mastery? The answer is that it doesn't matter. There is no end zone. To think of a number is to live in a conditional future. We're simply talking about a lot of hours, that to get where we want to go isn't about brilliance, but continual effort. While that's not a terribly sexy idea, it should be an encouraging one. Because it means it's all within reach for all of us, provided we have the constitution and humbleness to be patient and the fortitude to put in the work. By this point, you probably understand why the ego would bristle at this idea. Within reach. It complains. That means you're saying I don't have it now. Exactly right. You don't. No one does. Our ego wants the ideas and the fact that we aspire to do something about them to be enough. Wants the hours we spend planning and attending conferences or chatting with impressed friends to count toward the tally that success seems to require. It wants to be paid well for its time, and it wants to do the fun stuff, the stuff that gets attention, credit, or glory. That's the reality. Where we decide to put our energy decides what we'll ultimately accomplish. As a young man, Bill Clinton began a collection of note cards upon which he would write names and phone numbers of friends and acquaintances who might be of service when he eventually entered politics. Each night, before he ever had a reason to, he would flip through the box, make phone calls, write letters, or add notations about their interactions. Over the years, this collection grew to 10,000 cards. It's what put him in the Oval Office and continues to return dividends. Or think of Darwin, working for decades on his theory of evolution, refraining from publishing it because it wasn't yet perfect. Hardly anyone knew what he was working on. No one said, "Hey Charles, it's okay that you're taking so long because what you're working on is just so important." They didn't know. He couldn't have known. He just knew that it wasn't done yet, that it could be better, and that was enough to keep him going. So, do we sit down alone and struggle with our work? Work that may or may not go anywhere, that may be discouraging or painful. Do we love work, making a living to do work, not the other way around? Do we love practice the way great athletes do? Or do we chase short-term attention and validation, whether that's indulging in the endless search for ideas or simply the distraction of talk and chatter? Fac, si facis. There is another apt Latin expression, materiam superbat opus. The material we've been given genetically, emotionally, financially, that's where we begin. We don't control that. We do control what we make of that material and whether we squander it. As a young basketball player, Bill Bradley would remind himself, when you are not practicing, remember, someone somewhere is practicing, and when you meet him he will win. The Bible says something similar in its own way. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. You can lie to yourself, saying that you put in the time, or pretend that you're working, but eventually someone will show up. You'll be tested, and quite possibly found out. Since Bradley went on to be an All-American, a Rhodes Scholar, then a two-time champion with the New York Knicks and a U.S. Senator, you get the sense that this sort of dedication will take you places. So we must have it, because there is no triumph without toil. Wouldn't it be great if work was as simple as opening a vein and letting the genius pour out? Or if you could walk into that meeting and spit brilliance off the top of your head. You walk up to the canvas, hurl your paint at it, and modern art emerges, right? That is the fantasy, rather, that is the lie. Back to another popular old trope, fake it till you make it. It's no surprise that such an idea has found increasing relevance in our noxiously bullshit, nerf world. When it is difficult to tell a real producer from an adept self-promoter, of course some people will roll the dice and manage to play the confidence game. Make it so you don't have to fake it, that's the key. Can you imagine a doctor trying to get by with anything less? or a quarterback, or a bull rider? More to the point, would you want them to? So why would you try otherwise? Every time you sit down to work, remind yourself, I am delaying gratification by doing this. I am passing the marshmallow test. I am earning what my ambition burns for. I am making an investment in myself instead of in my ego. Give yourself a little credit for this choice, but not so much because you've got to get back to the task at hand, practicing, working, improving. Work is finding yourself alone at the track when the weather kept everyone else indoors. Work is pushing through the pain and crappy first drafts and prototypes. It is ignoring whatever plaudits others are getting, and more importantly, ignoring whatever plaudits you may be getting. Because there is work to be done. Work doesn't want to be good. It is made so, despite the headwind. There is another old expression, you know a workman by the chips they leave. It's true. To judge your progress properly, just take a look at the floor. For everything that comes next, is the enemy. 'Tis a common proof that lowliness is young ambition's ladder. We know where we want to end up, success. We want to matter. Wealth and recognition and reputation are nice too. We want it all. The problem is that we're not sure that humility can get us there. We are petrified, as the Reverend Dr. Sam Wells put it, that if we are humble, we will end up subjugated, trodden on, embarrassed, and irrelevant. Midway through his career, if you'd asked our model Sherman how he felt, he probably would have described himself in almost exactly those terms. He had not made much money. He had won no great battles. He had not seen his name in lights or headlines. He might have, at that moment, before the Civil War, begun to question the path he'd chosen, and whether those who follow it finished last. This is the thinking that creates the Faustian bargain that turns most clean ambition into shameless addiction. In the early stages, ego can be temporarily adaptive. Craziness can pass for audaciousness. Delusions can pass for confidence, ignorance for courage. But it's just kicking the costs down the road. Because no one ever said, reflecting on the whole of someone's life, man, that monstrous ego sure was worth it. The internal debate about confidence calls to mind a well-known concept from the radio pioneer Ira Glass, which could be called the taste-talent gap. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap, that for the first couple years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good. It's really not that great. It's trying to be good, it has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer, and your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. It is in precisely this gap that ego can seem comforting. Who wants to look at themselves and their work and find that it does not measure up? And so here we might bluster our way through. Cover up hard truths with sheer force of personality and drive and passion. Or we can face our shortcomings honestly and put the time in. We can let this humble us, see clearly where we are talented and where we need to improve, and then put in the work to bridge that gap. And we can set upon positive habits that will last a lifetime. If ego was tempting in Sherman's time, in this era, we are like Lance Armstrong training for the 1999 Tour de France. We are Barry Bonds debating whether to walk into the Balco Clinic. We flirt with arrogance and deceit, and in the process grossly overstate the importance of winning at all costs. Everyone is juicing, the ego says to us, you should too. There's no way to beat them without it, we think. Of course, what is truly ambitious is to face life and proceed with quiet confidence in spite of the distractions. Let others grasp at crutches. It will be a lonely fight to be real, to say, I'm not going to take the edge off. To say, I am going to be myself, the best version of that self. I am in this for the long game, no matter how brutal it might be. To do, not be. For Sherman, it was precisely his choice that prepared him for the time his country and history most needed him, and allowed him to navigate the massive responsibilities that shortly came his way. In this quiet crucible, he'd forged a personality that was ambitious but patient, innovative without being brash, brave without being dangerous. He was a real leader. You have a chance to do this yourself. To play a different game, to be utterly audacious in your aims. Because what comes next is going to test you in ways that you cannot begin to understand. For ego is a wicked sister of success. And you're about to experience what that means. Part 2. Success. Here we are at the top of a mountain we worked hard to climb, or at least the summit is in sight. Now we face new temptations and problems. We breathe thinner air in an unforgiving environment. Why is success so ephemeral? Ego shortens it. Whether a collapse is dramatic or a slow erosion, it's always possible and often unnecessary. We stop learning, we stop listening, and we lose our grasp on what matters. We become victims of ourselves and the competition. Sobriety, open-mindedness, organization, and purpose, these are the great stabilizers. They balance out the ego and pride that comes with achievement and recognition. To whatever success you have achieved, ego is the enemy. Two different characters are presented to our emulation, the one of proud ambition and ostentatious avidity, the other of humble modesty and equitable justice. Two different models, two different pictures, are held out to us, according to which we may fashion our own character and behavior, the one more gaudy and glittering in its coloring, the other more correct and more exquisitely beautiful in its outline. At a business meeting in January 1924, Howard Hughes Sr., the successful inventor and tool magnate, stood up, convulsed, and died from a sudden heart attack at the age of 54. His son, a quiet, reserved, and sheltered boy of just 18, inherited 3/4 of the private company, which held patents and leases critical to oil drilling, worth nearly $1 million. Various family members were bequeathed the remaining shares. In a move of almost incomprehensible foresight, the young Hughes, whom many saw as a spoiled little boy, made the decision to buy out his relatives and control the entire company himself. Against their objections and still legally considered a minor, Hughes leveraged his personal assets and nearly all the company's funds to purchase the stock, and in doing so, consolidated ownership of a business that would create billions of dollars of cash profit over the next century. It was a bold move for a young man with essentially zero experience in business. And it was with similar boldness that over his career he would create one of the most embarrassing, wasteful, and dishonest business track records in history. In retrospect, his years at the helm of the Hughes empire resemble a deranged crime spree more than a capitalistic enterprise. One cannot argue whether Hughes was gifted, visionary, and brilliant. He just was. Literally a mechanical genius, he was also one of the best and bravest pilots in the pioneer days of aviation. And as a businessman and filmmaker, he had the ability to predict wide, sweeping changes that came to transform not just the industries he was involved in, but America itself. Yet, after filtering out his acumen from the legend, glamour, and self-promotion at which he was so adept, only one image remains: an egomaniac who evaporated hundreds of millions of dollars of his own wealth and met a miserable, pathetic end. Not by accident, not because he was beset by unforeseen circumstances or competition, but almost exclusively due to his own actions. A quick rundown of his feats, if you can call them that, provides a stark perspective. After purchasing control of his father's tool company from his family, Hughes abandoned it almost immediately except to repeatedly siphon off its cash. He left Houston and never stepped foot in the company's headquarters again. He moved to Los Angeles, where he decided to become a film producer and celebrity. Trading stocks from his bedside, he lost more than $8 million in the market leading up to the Depression. His most well-known movie, Hell's Angels, took 3 years to make, lost $1.5 million on a budget of $4.2 million, and nearly bankrupted the tool company in the process. Then, not having learned a lesson the first time, Hughes lost another $4 million on Chrysler stock in early 1930. He then put all this aside to enter the aviation business, creating a defense contractor called the Hughes Aircraft Company. Despite some astounding personal achievements as an inventor, Hughes's company was a failure. His 2 contracts during World War II, worth $40 million, were massive failures at the expense of the American taxpayer and himself. The most notable, the Spruce Goose, which Hughes called the Hercules and which was one of the biggest planes ever made, took more than 5 years to develop, cost roughly $20 million, and flew just a single time for barely a mile, only 70 feet above the water. At his insistence and expense, it then sat in an air-conditioned hangar in Long Beach for decades at the cost of $1 million a year. Deciding to double down on the film business, Hughes purchased the movie studio RKO and produced losses of over $22 million. Tiring of these businesses as he had of the tool company, he forsook defense contracting and handed it off to executives to run, where it slowly began to thrive. Because of his absence. It would make sense to stop here to avoid belaboring the issue, but that would risk skipping Hughes's egregious tax fraud, the plane crashes and fatal car accidents. The millions he wasted on private investigators, lawyers, contracts for starlets he refused to let act, property he never lived in. The fact that the only thing that got him to behave responsibly was the threat of public exposure, the paranoia, racism, and bullying, the failed marriages, the drug addiction, and dozens of other ventures and businesses he mismanaged. That we have made a hero out of Howard Hughes, a young Joan Didion wrote, tells us something interesting about ourselves. She's absolutely right. For Howard Hughes, despite his reputation, was quite possibly one of the worst businessmen of the 20th century. Usually a bad businessman fails and ceases to be in business anymore, making it hard to see what truly caused his failures. But thanks to the steady chain of profits from his father's company, which he found too boring to interfere with, Hughes was able to stay afloat, allowing us to see the damage that his ego repeatedly wrought, to himself as a person, to the people around him, to what he wanted to accomplish. There is a scene from Howard's slow descent into madness that bears illustrating. His biographers have him sitting naked in his favorite white chair, unwashed, unkempt, working around the clock to battle lawyers, investigations, investors, in an attempt to save his empire and to hide his shameful secrets. One minute he would dictate some irrational multi-page memo about Kleenex, food preparation, or how employees should not speak to him directly, and then he would turn around and seize upon a genuinely brilliant strategy to outrun his creditors and enemies. It was as if, they observed, his mind and business were split in two parts. It was as if, they wrote, IBM had deliberately established a pair of subsidiaries, one to produce computers and profits, another to manufacture Edsels and losses. If someone was looking for a flesh and blood metaphor for ego and destruction, it would be hard to do better than this image of a man working furiously with one hand toward a goal and with the other working equally hard to undermine it. Howard Hughes, like all of us, was not completely crazy or completely sane. His ego, fueled and exacerbated by physical injuries and various addictions, led him into a darkness that we can scarcely comprehend. There were brief moments of lucidity when the sharp mind of Hughes broke through, times when he made some of his best moves, but as he progressed through life, these moments became increasingly rare. Eventually, ego killed Howard Hughes as much as the mania and trauma did, if they were ever separate to begin with. You can only see this if you want to see it. It's more attractive and exciting to see the rebel billionaire, the eccentric, the world renown, and the fame and think, oh, how I want that. You do not. Howard Hughes, like so many wealthy people, died in an asylum of his own making. He felt little joy. He enjoyed almost nothing of what he had. Most importantly, he wasted. He wasted so much talent, so much bravery, and so much energy. Without virtue and training, Aristotle observed, it is hard to bear the results of good fortune suitably. We can learn from Hughes because he was so publicly and visibly unable to bear his birthright properly. His endless taste for the spotlight, no matter how unflattering, gives us an opportunity to see our own tendencies, our own struggles with success and luck, refracted back through his tumultuous life. His enormous ego and its destructive path through Hollywood, through the defense industry, through Wall Street, through the aviation industry give us a look inside someone who was repeatedly felled by impulses we all have. Of course, he's far from the only person in history to follow such an arc. Will you follow his trajectory? Sometimes ego is suppressed on the ascent. Sometimes an idea is so powerful or timing is so perfect that it can temporarily support or even compensate for a massive ego. As success arrives, like it does for a team that has just won a championship, ego begins to toy with our minds and weaken the will that made us win in the first place. We know that empires always fall, so we must think about why, and why they seem to always collapse from within. Harold Janine was the CEO who more or less invented the concept of the modern international conglomerate. Through a series of acquisitions, mergers, and takeovers, he took a small company called ITT from $1 million in revenues in 1959 to nearly $17 billion in 1977, the year he retired. Some claimed that Janine himself was an egotist. In any case, he spoke candidly about the effects that ego had in his industry and warned executives against it. The worst disease which can afflict business executives in their work is not, as popularly supposed, alcoholism, it's egotism, Janine famously said. In the Mad Men era of corporate America, there was a major drinking problem, but ego has the same roots: insecurity, fear, a dislike for brutal objectivity. Whether in middle management or top management, unbridled personal egotism blinds a man to the realities around him. More and more he comes to live in a world of his own imagination, and because he sincerely believes he can do no wrong, he becomes a menace to the men and women who have to work under his direction. He wrote in his memoirs, "Here we are having accomplished something. After we give ourselves proper credit, ego wants us to think, I'm special. I'm better. The rules don't apply to me." Man is pushed by drives, Viktor Frankl observed, but he is pulled by values. Ruled by or ruling? Which are you? Without the right values, success is brief. If we wish to do more than flash, if we wish to last, then it is time to understand how to battle this new form of ego and what values and principles are required in order to beat it. Success is intoxicating, yet to sustain it requires sobriety. We can't keep learning if we think we already know everything. We cannot buy into myths we make ourselves, or the noise and chatter of the outside world. We must understand that we are a small part of an interconnected universe. On top of all this, we have to build an organization and a system around what we do, one that is about the work and not about us. The verdict on Hughes is in. Ego wrecked him. A similar judgment awaits us all at some point. Over the course of your own career, you will face the choices that he did, that all people do. Whether you built your empire from nothing or inherited it, whether your wealth is financial or merely a cultivated talent, entropy is seeking to destroy it as you read this. Can you handle success? Or will it be the worst thing that ever happened to you? Always stay a student. Every man I meet is my master in some point, and in that I learn of him. The legend of Genghis Khan has echoed through history. A barbarian conqueror, fueled by bloodlust, terrorizing the civilized world. We have him and his Mongol horde traveling across Asia and Europe, insatiable, stopping at nothing to plunder, rape, and kill not just the people who stood in their way, but the cultures they had built. Then, not unlike his nomadic band of warriors, this terrible cloud simply disappeared from history, because the Mongols built nothing that could last. Like all reactionary, emotional assessments, this could not be more wrong. For not only was Genghis Khan one of the greatest military minds who ever lived, he was a perpetual student, whose stunning victories were often the result of his ability to absorb the best technologies, practices, and innovations of each new culture his empire touched. In fact, if there is one theme in his reign and in the several centuries of dynastic rule that followed, it's this: appropriation. Under Genghis Khan's direction, the Mongols were as ruthless about stealing and absorbing the best of each culture they encountered as they were about conquest itself. Though there were essentially no technological inventions, no beautiful buildings, or even great Mongol art, with each battle and enemy, their culture learned and absorbed something new. Genghis Khan was not born a genius. Instead, as one biographer put it, his was a persistent cycle of pragmatic learning, experimental adaptation, and constant revision driven by his uniquely disciplined and focused will. He was the greatest conqueror the world ever knew because he was more open to learning than any other conqueror has ever been. Khan's first powerful victories came from the reorganization of his military units, splitting his soldiers into groups of 10. This he stole from neighboring Turkic tribes and unknowingly converted the Mongols to the decimal system. Soon enough, their expanding empire brought them into contact with another technology they'd never experienced before: walled cities. In the Tangut raids, Khan first learned the ins and outs of war against fortified cities and the strategies critical to laying siege, and quickly became an expert. Later, with help from Chinese engineers, he taught his soldiers how to build siege machines that could knock down city walls. In his campaigns against the Jurcht, Khan learned the importance of winning hearts and minds. By working with the scholars and royal family of the lands he conquered, Khan was able to hold on to and manage these territories in ways that most empires could not. Afterward, in every country or city he held, Khan would call for the smartest astrologers, scribes, doctors, thinkers, and advisors, anyone who could aid his troops and their efforts. His troops traveled with interrogators and translators for precisely this purpose. It was a habit that would survive his death. While the Mongols themselves seemed dedicated almost solely to the art of war, they put to good use every craftsman, merchant, scholar, entertainer, cook, and skilled worker they came in contact with. The Mongol Empire was remarkable for its religious freedoms, and most of all, for its love of ideas and convergence of cultures. It brought lemons to China for the first time, and Chinese noodles to the West. It spread Persian carpets, German mining technology, French metalworking, and Islam. The cannon, which revolutionized warfare, was said to be the resulting fusion of Chinese gunpowder, Muslim flamethrowers, and European metalwork. It was Mongol openness to learning and new ideas that brought them together. As we first succeed, we will find ourselves in new situations, facing new problems. The freshly promoted soldier must learn the art of politics. The salesman, how to manage. The founder, how to delegate. The writer, how to edit others. The comedian, how to act. The chef turned restaurateur, how to run the other side of the house. This is not a harmless conceit. The physicist John Wheeler, who helped develop the hydrogen bomb, once observed that, as our island of knowledge grows, so does the shore of our ignorance. In other words, each victory and advancement that made Khan smarter also bumped him against new situations he'd never encountered before. It takes a special kind of humility to grasp that you know less, even as you know and grasp more and more. It's remembering Socrates' wisdom lay in the fact that he knew next to nothing. With accomplishment comes a growing pressure to pretend that we know more than we do. To pretend we already know everything. Scientia infla, knowledge puffs up. That's the worry and the risk, thinking that we're set and secure, when in reality understanding and mastery is a fluid, continual process. The 9-time Grammy and Pulitzer Prize winning jazz musician Wynton Marsalis once advised a promising young musician on the mindset required in the lifelong study of music. Humility engenders learning because it beats back the arrogance that puts blinders on. It leaves you open for truths to reveal themselves. You don't stand in your own way. Do you know how you can tell when someone is truly humble? I believe there's one simple test. Because they consistently observe and listen, the humble improve. They don't assume, I know the way. No matter what you've done up to this point, you better still be a student. If you're not still learning, you're already dying. It is not enough only to be a student at the beginning. It is a position that one has to assume for life. Learn from everyone and everything. From the people you beat, and the people who beat you, from the people you dislike, even from your supposed enemies. At every step and every juncture in life, there is the opportunity to learn, and even if the lesson is purely remedial, we must not let ego block us from hearing it again. Too often, convinced of our own intelligence, we stay in a comfort zone that ensures that we never feel stupid and are never challenged to learn or reconsider what we know. It obscures from view various weaknesses in our understanding, until eventually it's too late to change course. This is where the silent toll is taken. Each of us faces a threat as we pursue our craft. Like sirens on the rocks, ego sings a soothing, validating song, which can lead to a wreck. The second we let the ego tell us we have graduated, learning grinds to a halt. That's why Frank Shamrock said, always stay a student. As in, it never ends. The solution is as straightforward as it is initially uncomfortable. Pick up a book on a topic you know next to nothing about. Put yourself in rooms where you're the least knowledgeable person. That uncomfortable feeling, that defensiveness that you feel when your most deeply held assumptions are challenged, what about subjecting yourself to it deliberately? Change your mind. Change your surroundings. An amateur is defensive. The professional finds learning to be enjoyable. They like being challenged and humbled, and engage in education as an ongoing and endless process. Most military cultures and people in general seek to impose values and control over what they encounter. What made the Mongols different was their ability to weigh each situation objectively and, if need be, swap out previous practices for new ones. All great businesses start this way, but then something happens. Take the theory of disruption, which posits that at some point in time, every industry will be disrupted by some trend or innovation that, despite all the resources in the world, the incumbent interests will be incapable of responding to. Why is this? Why can't businesses change and adapt? A large part of it is because they lost the ability to learn. They stopped being students. The second this happens to you, your knowledge becomes fragile. The great manager and business thinker Peter Drucker says that it's not enough simply to want to learn. As people progress, they must also understand how they learn and then set up processes to facilitate this continual education. Otherwise, we are dooming ourselves to a sort of self-imposed ignorance. Entitlement, control, and paranoia. One of the symptoms of approaching nervous breakdown is the belief that one's work is terribly important. When Xerxes, the Persian emperor, crossed the Hellespont during his invasion of Greece, the waters surged up and destroyed the bridges his engineers had spent days building. And so he threw chains into the river, ordered it be given 300 lashes, and branded it with hot irons. As his men delivered his punishment, they were ordered to harangue it. "You salt and bitter stream, your master lays this punishment upon you for injuring him who never injured you." Oh, and he cut off the heads of the men who had built the bridges. Herodotus, the great historian, called the display presumptuous, which is probably an understatement. Surely, preposterous and delusional are more appropriate. Then again, it was part of his personality. Shortly before this, Xerxes had written a letter to a nearby mountain in which he needed to cut a canal. "You may be tall and proud," he wrote, "but don't you dare cause me any trouble. Otherwise, I'll topple you into the sea." How hilarious is that? More important, how pathetic. Xerxes' delusional threats are unfortunately not a historical anomaly. With success, particularly power, comes some of the greatest and most dangerous delusions: entitlement, control, and paranoia. Hopefully you won't find yourself so crazed that you start anthropomorphizing and inflicting retribution on inanimate objects. That's pure, recognizable crazy, and thankfully rare. What's more likely and more common is we begin to overestimate our own power. Then we lose perspective. Eventually, we can end like Xerxes, a monstrous joke. "The strongest poison ever known," the poet William Blake wrote, "came from Caesar's laurel crown." Success casts a spell over us. The problem lies in the path that got us to success in the first place. What we've accomplished often required feats of raw power and force of will. Both entrepreneurship and art required the creation of something where nothing existed before. Wealth means beating the market and the odds. Athletic champions have proved their physical superiority over opponents. Achieving success involved ignoring the doubts and reservations of the people around us. It meant rejecting rejection. It required taking certain risks. We could have given up at any time, but we're here precisely because we didn't. Persistence and courage in the face of ridiculous odds are partially irrational traits, in some cases really irrational. When it works, those tendencies can feel like they've been vindicated. And why shouldn't they? It's human to think that since it's been done once, that the world was changed in some big or small way, that there is now a magical power in our possession. We're here because we're bigger, stronger, smarter. That we make the reality we inhabit. Right before he destroyed his own billion-dollar company, Ty Warner, creator of Beanie Babies, overrode the cautious objections of one of his employees and bragged, "I could put the Ty heart on manure and they'd buy it." He was wrong. And the company not only catastrophically failed, he later narrowly missed going to jail. It doesn't matter if you're a billionaire, a millionaire, or just a kid who snagged a good job early. The complete and utter sense of certainty that got you here can become a liability if you're not careful. The demands and dream you had for a better life? The ambition that fueled your effort? These begin as earnest drives but left unchecked become hubris and entitlement. The same goes for the instinct to take charge. Now you're addicted to control. Driven to prove the doubters wrong? Welcome to the seeds of paranoia. Yes, There are legitimate stresses and anguish that come with the responsibilities of your new life. All the things you're managing, the frustrating mistakes of people who should know better, the endless creep of obligations, no one prepares us for that, which makes the feelings all the harder to deal with. The promised land was supposed to be nice, not aggravating. But you can't let the walls close in on you. You've got to get yourself and your perceptions under control. When Arthur Lee was sent to France and England to serve as one of America's diplomats during the Revolutionary War, instead of relishing the opportunity to work with his fellow diplomats Silas Deane and elder statesman Benjamin Franklin, he raged and resented them and suspected them of disliking him. Finally, Franklin wrote him a letter. "If you do not cure yourself of this temper," Franklin advised, "it will end in insanity, of which it is the symptomatic forerunner." Probably because he was in such command of his own temper, Franklin decided that writing the letter was cathartic enough. He never sent it. If you've ever listened to the Oval Office tapes of Richard Nixon, you can hear the same sickness, and you wish someone could have sent him such a letter. It's a harrowing insight into a man who has lost his grip not just on what he is legally allowed to do, on what his job was, but on reality itself. He vacillates wildly from supreme confidence to dread and fear. He talks over his subordinates and rejects information and feedback that challenges what he wants to believe. He lives in a bubble in which no one can say no, not even his conscience. There's a letter from General Winfield Scott to Jefferson Davis, then the Secretary of War for the United States. Davis belligerently pestered Scott repeatedly about some trivial matter. Scott ignored it until, finally, forced to address it, he wrote that he pitied Davis. "Compassion is always due," he said to him, "to an enraged imbecile who lays about him in blows which hurt only himself. Ego is its own worst enemy. It hurts the ones we love too. Our families and friends suffer for it. So do our customers, fans, and clients." A critic of Napoleon nailed it when remarking, "He despises the nation whose applause he seeks." He couldn't help but see the French people as pieces to be manipulated, people he had to be better than, people who, unless they were totally, unconditionally supportive of him, were against him. A smart man or woman must regularly remind themselves of the limits of their power and reach. Entitlement assumes, "This is mine. I've earned it." At the same time, entitlement nickels and dimes other people because it can't conceive of valuing another person's time as highly as its own. It delivers tirades and pronouncements that exhaust the people who work for and with us, who have no choice other than to go along. It overstates our abilities to ourselves, it renders generous judgment of our prospects, and it creates ridiculous expectations. Control says, "It all must be done my way, even little things, even inconsequential things." It can become paralyzing perfectionism, or a million pointless battles fought merely for the sake of exerting its say. It too exhausts people whose help we need, particularly quiet people who don't object until we've pushed them to their breaking point. We fight with the clerk at the airport, the customer service representative on the telephone, the agent who examines our claim. To what end? In reality, we don't control the weather, we don't control the market, we don't control other people, and our efforts and energies in spite of this are pure waste. Paranoia thinks, "I can't trust anyone. I'm in this totally by myself and for myself." It says, "I'm surrounded by fools." It says, "Focusing on my work, my obligations, myself is not enough. I also have to be orchestrating various machinations behind the scenes to get them before they get me, to get them back for the slights I perceive." Everyone has had a boss, a partner, a parent like this. All that strife, anger, chaos, and conflict. How did it go for them? How did it end? "He who indulges empty fears earns himself real fears," wrote Seneca, who as a political advisor witnessed destructive paranoia at the highest levels. The sad feedback loop is that the relentless looking out for number one can encourage other people to undermine and fight us. They see that behavior for what it really is, a mask for weakness, insecurity, and instability. In its frenzy to protect itself, paranoia creates the persecution it seeks to avoid, making the owner a prisoner of its own delusions and chaos. Is this the freedom you envisioned when you dreamed of your success? Likely not. So stop. Beware the disease of me. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, who am I? There were great Allied generals of World War II, Patton, Bradley, Montgomery, Eisenhower, MacArthur, Zhukov, and then there was George Catlett Marshall Jr. Although all of them served their countries and fought and led bravely, one stands apart. Today, we see World War II as a clear fight in which good aligned selflessly against evil. The problem is that victory and the passage of time have obscured the all-too-humanness of the people who were on the right side of that fight. That is, we forget the politics, the backstabbing, the spotlight coveting, the posturing, the greed, and the ass-covering among the Allies. While the other generals protected their turf, fought with each other, and eagerly aspired to their place in history, that behavior was virtually absent in one man, General George Marshall. More impressively, Marshall quietly outpaced all of them with the magnitude of his accomplishments. What was his secret? Pat Riley, the famous coach and manager who led the Los Angeles Lakers and Miami Heat to multiple championships, says that great teams tend to follow a trajectory. When they start, before they have won, a team is innocent. If the conditions are right, they come together, they watch out for each other and work together toward their collective goal. This stage he calls the innocent climb. After a team starts to win and media attention begins, the simple bonds that join the individuals together begin to fray. Players calculate their own importance. Chests swell. Frustrations emerge. Egos appear. The innocent climb, Pat Riley says, is almost always followed by the disease of me. It can strike any winning team in any year and at any moment, and does with alarming regularity. It's Shaq and Kobe, unable to play together. It's Jordan punching Steve Kerr, Horace Grant, and Will Perdue, his own team members. He punched people on his own team. It's Enron employees plunging California into darkness for personal profit. It's leaks to the media from a disgruntled executive hoping to scuttle a project he dislikes. It's negging and every other intimidation tactic. For us, it's beginning to think that we're better, that we're special, that our problems and experiences are so incredibly different from everyone else's that no one could possibly understand. It's an attitude that has sunk far better people, teams, and causes than ours. With General Marshall, who began his term as Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army on the day Germany invaded Poland in 1939 and served through the entire war, we see one of history's few exceptions to this trend. Marshall somehow never caught the disease of me, and in many ways, often shamed it out of the people who did. It begins with his balanced relationship to rank, an obsession for most people in his line of work. He was not a man who abstained from every public show of rank or status. He insisted that the president call him General Marshall, not George, for example. But while other generals regularly lobbied for promotions, General MacArthur advanced over other officers in the pre-war years largely due to the aggressive efforts of his mother. Marshall actively discouraged it. When others began to push for Marshall to be chief of staff, he asked them to stop, because makes me conspicuous in the army. Too conspicuous, in fact. Later, he discouraged an effort by the House to pass a bill awarding him the rank of Field Marshal, not only because he thought the name Field Marshal would sound ridiculous, but because he didn't want to outrank or hurt his mentor, General Pershing, who was near death and a constant source of advice and guidance. Can you imagine? In all these cases, his sense of honor meant turning down honors, and often letting them go to other people. Like any normal human being, he wanted them only the right way. More important, he knew that, however nice they would have been to have, he could do without them while perhaps others could not. Ego needs honors in order to be validated. Confidence, on the other hand, is able to wait and focus on the task at hand regardless of external recognition. Early on in our careers, we may be able to make these sacrifices more easily. We can drop out of a prestigious college to start our own company. Or we can tolerate being looked over once in a while. Once we've made it, the tendency is to switch to the mindset of getting what's mine. Now, all of a sudden awards and recognition matter, even though they weren't what got us here. We need that money, that title, that media attention, not for the team or the cause, but for ourselves. Because we've earned it. Let's make one thing clear. We never earn the right to be greedy or to pursue our interests at the expense of everyone else. To think otherwise is not only egotistical, it's counterproductive. Marshall was tested on this to the extreme. A job he'd trained his whole life for was up for grabs. Command of the troops on D-Day, essentially the largest coordinated invasion the world had ever seen. Roosevelt let it be known that it was Marshall's if he wanted it. A general's place in history is assured by his feats in battle, so even though Marshall was needed in Washington, Roosevelt wanted to give him the opportunity to take command. Marshall would have none of it. "The decision is yours, Mr. President. My wishes have nothing to do with the matter." The role and the glory went to Eisenhower. It came to be that Eisenhower was, in fact, the best man for that job. He performed superbly and helped win the war. Would anything else have been worth the trade-off? Yet this is what we regularly refuse to do. Our ego precludes serving any larger mission we're a part of. What are we going to do? Let someone get one over on us? The writer Cheryl Strayed once told a young reader, "You're becoming who you are going to be, and so you might as well not be an asshole." This is one of the most dangerous ironies of success. It can make us someone we never wanted to be in the first place. The disease of me can corrupt the most innocent clime. There was a general who treated Marshall poorly, essentially banishing him to some obscure postings in the middle of his career. Later, Marshall surpassed him and had his chance for revenge. Except he didn't take it. Because whatever the man's flaws, Marshall saw that he was still of use and that the country would be worse off without him. What were the thanks for this quiet suppression of ego? Just another job well done, and not much more. The word for that is one we don't use much anymore: magnanimous. It was good strategy too, of course, but mostly Marshall was gracious, forgiving, and magnanimous because it was right. According to observers as high up as President Truman, what separated Marshall from nearly everyone else in the military and politics is that never did General Marshall think about himself. Part 3. Failure. Here we are experiencing the trials endemic to any journey. Perhaps we've failed, perhaps our goal turned out to be harder to achieve than anticipated. No one is permanently successful, and not everyone finds success on the first attempt. We all deal with setbacks along the way. Ego not only leaves us unprepared for these circumstances, it often contributed to their occurrence in the first place. The way to rise again, requires a reorientation and increased self-awareness. We don't need pity, our own or anyone else's. We need purpose, poise, and patience. To whatever failure and challenges you will face, ego is the enemy. It is because mankind are disposed to sympathize more entirely with our joy than with our sorrow that we make parade of our riches and conceal our poverty. Nothing is so mortifying as to be obliged to expose our distress to the view of the public, and to feel that though our situation is open to the eyes of all mankind, no mortal conceives for us the half of what we suffer. For the first half of her life, Katharine Graham saw pretty much everything go right. Her father, Eugene Meyer, was a financial genius who made a fortune in the stock market. Her mother was a beautiful as well as brilliant socialite. As a child, Katharine had the best of everything: the best schools, the best teachers, big houses, and servants to wait on her. In 1933, her father bought the Washington Post, then a struggling but important newspaper, which he began to turn around. The only child to express any serious interest in it, Katharine inherited the paper when she was older and handed over the management to her equally impressive husband, Philip Graham. She was not another Howard Hughes, who squandered her family's fortune. She was not another rich kid who took the easy road in life because she could. But it was a cushy life, no question about it. She had been, in her words, content to be the tail to her husband's kite. Then life took a turn. Phil Graham's behavior became increasingly erratic. He drank heavily. He made reckless business decisions and bought things they couldn't afford. He began having affairs. He publicly humiliated his wife in front of nearly everyone they knew. Rich people problems, right? It turns out that he had suffered a severe mental breakdown, and as Katharine attempted to nurse him back to health, he killed himself with a hunting rifle while she napped in the next room. In 1963, at 46 years old, Katharine Graham, a mother of 3 with no work experience, found herself in charge of the Washington Post Company, a vast corporation with thousands of employees. She was unprepared, timid, and naive. Though tragic, these events were not exactly a cataclysmic failure. Graham was still rich, still white, still privileged. Still, it was not what she thought life had planned for her. That's the point. Failure and adversity are relative and unique to each of us. Almost without exception, this is what life does. It takes our plans and dashes them to pieces. Sometimes once, sometimes lots of times. As the financial philosopher and economist George Goodman once observed, it is as if we are at a wonderful ball where the champagne sparkles in every glass and soft laughter falls upon the summer air. We know at some moment the black horseman will come shattering through the terrace doors, wreaking vengeance and scattering the survivors. Those who leave early are saved, but the ball is so splendid no one wants to leave while there is still time. So everybody keeps asking, what time is it? But none of the clocks have hands. He was speaking of economic crises, although he may as well have been talking about where all of us find ourselves, not just once in our lifetimes, but often. Things are going well. Perhaps we're aspiring to some big goal. Perhaps we're finally enjoying the fruits of our labors. At any point, fate can intervene. If success is ego intoxication, then failure can be a devastating ego blow, turning slips into falls and little troubles into great unravelings. If ego is often just a nasty side effect of great success, it can be fatal during failure. We have many names for these problems: sabotage, unfairness, adversity, trials, tragedy. No matter the label, it's a trial. We don't like it, and some of us are sunk by it. Others seem to be built to make it through. In either case, it's a trial each person must endure. This fate is as much written for us as it was written 5,000 years ago for the young king in Gilgamesh. He will face a battle he knows not, he will ride a road he knows not. That's what came to Katharine Graham. It turned out that taking over the paper was the first in a series of trying and wrenching events that lasted for nearly 2 decades. Thomas Paine, remarking about George Washington, once wrote that there is a natural firmness in some minds which cannot be unlocked by trifles, but which, when unlocked, discovers a cabinet of fortitude. Graham seems to have possessed a similar cabinet. As she settled into her leadership position, Graham found that the paper's conservative board was a constant obstacle. They were patronizing and risk-averse and had held the company back. To succeed, she would have to develop her own compass and not defer to others the way she always had. It eventually became clear that she needed a new executive editor. Against the board's advice, she replaced the well-liked good old boy with an unknown young upstart. Simple enough. The next turn of the screw wasn't. Just as the company was filing to go public, the Post received a collection of stolen government documents that editors asked Graham if they could run, despite a court order preventing their publication. She consulted the company's lawyers. She consulted the board. All advised against it, fearing it could sink the IPO or tie the company up in lawsuits for years. Torn, she decided to proceed and publish them, a decision with essentially no precedent. Shortly thereafter, the paper's investigation of a burglary at the Democratic National Committee's headquarters, relying on an anonymous source, threatened to put the company permanently at odds with the White House and Washington's powerful elite, as well as jeopardizing the government licenses they needed for the TV stations the Post owned. At one point, Nixon loyalist and the Attorney General of the United States John Mitchell threatened that Graham had so overreached that her tit was going to be caught in a big fat ringer. Another aide bragged that the White House was now thinking about how to screw the paper over. Put yourself in her shoes, the most powerful office in the world explicitly strategizing, how can we hurt the Post the most? On top of that, the Post stock price was less than stellar. The market was poor. In 1974, an investor began aggressively buying up shares in the company. The board was terrified. It could mean a hostile takeover. Graham was dispatched to deal with him. The following year, the paper's printers' union began a vicious, protracted strike. At one point, union members wore shirts that said, "Phil shot the wrong Graham." Despite, or perhaps because of, these tactics, she decided to fight the strike. At 4 o'clock one morning came a frantic call. The union had sabotaged company machinery, beaten up an innocent staffer, and then set one of the printing presses on fire. Typically, during printing strikes, competitors will help fellow papers out with their printing, but Graham's competitors refused, costing the Post $300,000 a day in advertising revenue. Then, a suite of major investors began to sell their stock positions in the Washington Post company, ostensibly having lost their faith in its prospects. Graham, pushed by the activist investor she'd met with earlier, decided her best option was to spend an enormous amount of the company's money to buy back its own shares on the public markets, a dangerous move that almost no one was doing at the time. That's a list of problems exhausting to read about, let alone live through. Yet because of Graham's perseverance, it shook out better than anyone could have possibly predicted. The leaked documents Katharine Graham published became known as the Pentagon Papers and were one of the most important stories in the history of journalism. The papers' Watergate reporting, which so incensed the Nixon White House, changed American history and took down an entire administration. It also won the paper a Pulitzer Prize. The investor others had feared turned out to be a young Warren Buffett, who became her business mentor and an enormous advocate and steward of the company. She prevailed in negotiations with the union and the strike eventually ended. Her main competitor in Washington, the one that had refused to come to her aid, the Star, suddenly folded and was acquired by the Post. Her stock buybacks, made contrary not only to business wisdom, but the judgments of the market, made the company billions of dollars. It turns out that the long, hard slog she endured, the mistakes she made, the repeated failures, crises, and attacks were all leading somewhere. If you'd invested $1 in the Post's IPO in 1971, it would be worth $89 by the time Graham stepped down in 1993, compared to $14 for her industry and $5 for the S&P 500. It makes her not just one of the most successful female CEOs of her generation and the first to run a Fortune 500 company, but one of the best CEOs ever, period. For someone born with a silver spoon in her mouth, the first decade and a half was what you'd call a baptism of fire. Graham faced difficulty after difficulty, difficulties that she wasn't really equipped to handle, or so it seemed. There were times when it probably felt like she should have just sold the damn thing and enjoyed her massive wealth. Graham didn't cause her husband's suicide, but it was left to her to carry on without him. She didn't ask for Watergate and the Pentagon Papers, but it fell on her to navigate their incendiary nature. While others went on buying and merger sprees in the 80s, she didn't. She doubled down on herself and her own company, despite the fact that it was treated as a weakling by Wall Street. She could have taken the easy way 100 times, but did not. At any given moment, there is the chance of failure or setbacks. Bill Walsh says, almost always your road to victory goes through a place called failure. In order to taste success again, we've got to understand what led to this moment of difficulty, what went wrong and why. We must deal with the situation in order to move past it. We'll need to accept it and to push through it. Graham was alone in most of this. She was blindly feeling her way through the dark, trying to figure out a tough situation she never expected to be in. She's an example of how you can do most everything right and still find yourself in deep shit. We think that failure only comes to egomaniacs who were begging for it. Nixon deserved to fail. Did Graham? The reality is that while yes, often people set themselves up to crash, good people fail all the time too. People who have already been through a lot find themselves stuck with more. Life isn't fair. Ego loves this notion, the idea that something is fair or not. Psychologists call it narcissistic injury when we take personally totally indifferent and objective events. We do that when our sense of self is fragile and dependent on life going our way all the time. Whether what you're going through is your fault or your problem doesn't matter, because it's yours to deal with right now. Graham's ego didn't cause her to fail, but if she'd had one, it certainly would have prevented her from succeeding ever again. You could say that failure always arrives uninvited, but through our ego, far too many of us allow it to stick around. What did Graham need through all this? Not swagger. Not bluster. She needed to be strong. She needed confidence and a willingness to endure. A sense of right and wrong. Purpose. It wasn't about her. It was about preserving her family's legacy. Protecting the paper. Doing her job. What about you? Will your ego betray you when things get difficult? Or can you proceed without it? When we face difficulty, particularly public difficulty, our friend the ego will show its true colors. Absorbing the negative feedback, ego says, I knew you couldn't do it. Why did you ever try? It claims, this isn't worth it. This isn't fair. This is somebody else's problem. Why don't you come up with a good excuse and wash your hands of this? It tells us we shouldn't have to put up with this. It tells us that we're not the problem. That is, it adds self-injury to every injury you experience. To paraphrase Epicurus, the narcissistically inclined live in an unwalled city. A fragile sense of self is constantly under threat. Illusions and accomplishments are not defenses, not when you've got the special sensitive antennae trained to receive the signals that challenge your precarious balancing act. It is a miserable way to live. The year before Walsh took over the 49ers, they went 2-14. His first year as head coach and general manager, they went 2-14. Can you imagine the disappointment? All the changes, all the work that went into that first year, and to end up in the exact same spot as the incompetent coach who preceded you? That's how most of us would think. And then we'd probably start blaming other people. Walsh realized he had to look for evidence elsewhere that it was turning around. For him, it was in how the games were being played, the good decisions and the changes that were being made inside the organization. 2 seasons later, they won the Super Bowl and then several more after that. At rock bottom, those victories must have felt like a long way off, which is why you have to be able to see past and through. As Goethe once observed, the great failing is to see yourself as more than you are and to value yourself at less than your true worth. A good metaphor might be the kind of stock buybacks that Katharine Graham made in the late 70s and 80s. Stock buybacks are controversial. They usually come from a company that is stalled or whose growth is decelerating. With buybacks, a CEO is making a rather incredible statement. She's saying, the market is wrong. It's valuing our company so incorrectly and clearly has so little idea where we are heading that we're going to spend the company's precious cash on a bet that they're wrong. Too often, dishonest or egotistical CEOs buy back company stock because they're delusional, or because they want to artificially inflate the stock price. Conversely, timid or weak CEOs wouldn't even consider betting on themselves. In Graham's case, she made a value judgment. With Buffett's help, she could see objectively that the market didn't appreciate the true worth of the company's assets. She knew that the reputational hits, the learning curve, had all contributed to a suppressed stock price, which aside from reducing her personal wealth, created a massive opportunity for the company. Over a short period, she would buy nearly 40% of the company's shares at a fraction of what they'd later be worth. The stock that Katharine Graham bought for approximately $20 a share would less than a decade later be worth more than $300. What both Graham and Walsh were doing was adhering to a set of internal metrics that allowed them to evaluate and gauge their progress while everyone on the outside was too distracted by supposed signs of failure or weakness. This is what guides us through difficulty. You might not get into your first choice college. You might not get picked for the project, or you might get passed over for the promotion. Someone might outbid you for the job, for your dream house, for the opportunity you feel everything depends on. This might happen tomorrow, it might happen 25 years from now. It could last for 2 minutes or 10 years. We know that everyone experiences failure and adversity, that we're all subject to the rules of gravity and averages. What does that mean? It means we'll face them too. As Plutarch finely expressed, the future bears down upon each one of us with all the hazards of the unknown. The only way out is through. Humble and strong people don't have the same trouble with these troubles that egotists do. There are fewer complaints and far less self-immolation. Instead, there's stoic, even cheerful, resilience. Pity isn't necessary. Their identity isn't threatened. They can get by without constant validation. This is what we're aspiring to, much more than mere success. What matters is that we can respond to what life throws at us. And how we make it through. Alive time or dead time. Vivre sans temps mort. Malcolm X was a criminal. He wasn't Malcolm X at the time. They called him Detroit Red, and he was a criminal opportunist who did a little bit of everything. He ran numbers. He sold drugs. He worked as a pimp. Then he moved up to armed robbery. He had his own burglary gang, which he ruled over with a combination of intimidation and boldness, exploiting the fact that he did not seem afraid to kill or die. Then, finally, he was arrested trying to fence an expensive watch he'd stolen. He was carrying a gun at the time, though to his credit he made no move to fight the officers who had trapped him. In his apartment, they found jewelry, furs, an arsenal of guns, and all his burglary tools. He got 10 years. It was February 1946. He was barely 21 years old. Even accounting for the shameful American racism and whatever systematic legal injustices existed at the time, Malcolm X was guilty. He deserved to go to jail. Who knows who else he would have hurt or killed had he continued his escalating life of crime. When your actions land you a lengthy prison sentence, rightly tried and convicted, something has gone wrong. You failed not only yourself, but the basic standards of society and morality. That was the case with Malcolm. So there he was in prison. A number. A body with roughly a decade to sit in a cage. He faced what Robert Greene, a man who 60 years later would find his wildly popular books banned in many federal prisons, calls an alive time or dead time scenario. How would the 7 years ultimately play out? What would Malcolm do with this time? According to Greene, there are two types of time in our lives. Dead time, when people are passive and waiting, and alive time, when people are learning and acting and utilizing every second. Every moment of failure, every moment or situation that we did not deliberately choose or control presents this choice. Alive time. Dead time. Which will it be? Malcolm chose alive time. He began to learn. He explored religion. He taught himself to be a reader by checking out a pencil and the dictionary from the prison library, and not only consumed it from start to finish, but copied it down longhand from cover to cover. All these words he'd never known existed before were transferred to his brain. As he said later, "From then until I left that prison, in every free moment I had, if I was not reading in the library, I was reading in my bunk." He read history, he read sociology, he read about religion, he read the classics, he read philosophers like Kant and Spinoza. Later, a reporter asked Malcolm, "What's your alma mater?" His one-word answer, "Books." Prison was his college. He transcended confinement through the pages he absorbed. He reflected that months passed without his even thinking about being detained against his will. He had never been so truly free in his life. Most people know what Malcolm X did after he got out of prison, but they don't realize or understand how prison made that possible. How a mix of acceptance, humility, and strength powered the transformation. They also aren't aware of how common this is in history, how many figures took seemingly terrible situations, a prison sentence, an exile, a bear market or depression, military conscription, even being sent to a concentration camp, and through their attitude and approach, turn those circumstances into fuel for their unique greatness. Francis Scott Key wrote the poem that became the national anthem of the United States while trapped on a ship during a prisoner exchange in the War of 1812. Viktor Frankl refined his psychologies of meaning and suffering during his ordeal in 3 Nazi concentration camps. Not that these opportunities always come in such serious situations. The author Ian Fleming was on bed rest and, per doctor's orders, forbidden from using a typewriter. They were worried he'd exert himself by writing another Bond novel. So he created Chitty Chitty Bang Bang by hand instead. Walt Disney made his decision to become a cartoonist while laid up after stepping on a rusty nail. Yes, it would feel much better in the moment to be angry, to be aggrieved, to be depressed or heartbroken. When injustice or the capriciousness of fate are inflicted on someone, the normal reaction is to yell, to fight back, to resist. You know the feeling, "I don't want this. I want it my way." This is short-sighted. Think of what you have been putting off. Issues you declined to deal with. Systemic problems that felt too overwhelming to address. Dead time is revived when we use it as an opportunity to do what we've long needed to do. As they say, this moment is not your life. But it is a moment in your life. How will you use it? Malcolm could have doubled down on the life that brought him to prison. Dead time isn't only dead because of sloth or complacency. He could have spent those years becoming a better criminal, strengthening his contacts, or planning his next score, but it still would have been dead time. He might have felt alive doing it, even as he was slowly killing himself. Many a serious thinker has been produced in prisons, as Robert Greene put it, where we have nothing to do but think. Yet sadly, prisons, in their literal and figurative forms, have produced far more degenerates, losers, and ne'er-do-wells. Inmates might have had nothing to do but think, it's just that what they chose to think about made them worse and not better. That's what so many of us do when we fail or get ourselves into trouble. Lacking the ability to examine ourselves, we reinvest our energy into exactly the patterns of behavior that caused our problems to begin with. It comes in many forms. Idly dreaming about the future, plotting our revenge, finding refuge in distraction, refusing to consider that our choices are a reflection of our character. We'd rather do basically anything else. But what if we said, this is an opportunity for me. I am using it for my purposes. I will not let this be dead time for me. The dead time was when we were controlled by ego. Now we can live. Who knows what you're currently doing? Hopefully it's not a prison term, even if it might feel like it. Maybe you're sitting in a remedial high school class. Maybe you're on hold. Maybe it's a trial separation. Maybe you're making smoothies while you save up money. Maybe you're stuck waiting out a contract or a tour of duty. Maybe this situation is one totally of your own making, or perhaps it's just bad luck. In life, we all get stuck with dead time. Its occurrence isn't in our control. Its use, on the other hand, as Booker T. Washington most famously put it, cast down your bucket where you are. Make use of what's around you. Don't let stubbornness make a bad situation worse. The effort is enough. What matters to an active man is to do the right thing. Whether the right thing comes to pass should not bother him. Belisarius is one of the greatest yet unknown military generals in all of history. His name has been so obscured and forgotten by history that he makes the underappreciated general marshal seem positively famous. At least they named the Marshall Plan after George. As Rome's highest-ranking commander under the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, Belisarius saved Western civilization on at least 3 occasions. As Rome collapsed and the seat of the empire moved to Constantinople, Belisarius was the only bright light in a dark time for Christianity. He won brilliant victories at Dara, Carthage, Naples, Sicily, and Constantinople. With just a handful of bodyguards against a crowd of tens of thousands, Belisarius saved the throne when an uprising had grown so riotous that the emperor made plans to abdicate. He reclaimed far-flung territories that had been lost for years despite being undermanned and deprived of resources. He recaptured and defended Rome for the first time since the barbarians had sacked and taken it. All of this before he was 40. His thanks? He was not given public triumphs. Instead, he was repeatedly placed under suspicion by the paranoid emperor he served, Justinian. His victories and sacrifices were undone with foolish treaties and bad faith. His personal historian, Procopius, was corrupted by Justinian to tarnish the man's image and legacy. Later, he was relieved of command. His only remaining title was the deliberately humiliating commander of the royal stable. Oh, and at the end of his illustrious career, Belisarius was stripped of his wealth, and according to the legend, blinded, and forced to beg in the streets to survive. Historians, scholars, and artists have lamented and argued about this treatment for centuries. Like all fair-minded people, they're outraged at the stupidity, the ungratefulness and injustice that this great and unusual man was subjected to. The one person we don't hear complaining about any of this? Not at the time, not at the end of his life, not even in private letters. Belisarius himself. Ironically, he probably could have taken the throne on numerous occasions, though it appears he was never even tempted. While the Emperor Justinian fell prey to all the vices of absolute power, control, paranoia, selfishness, greed, we see hardly a trace of them in Belisarius. In his eyes, he was just doing his job, one he believed was his sacred duty. He knew that he did it well. He knew he had done what was right. That was enough. Fight Club moments: if you shut up truth and bury it under the ground, it will but grow, and gather to itself such explosive power that the day it bursts through it will blow up everything in its way. There is hardly the space to list all the successful people who have hit rock bottom. The notion that everyone experiences jarring, perspective-altering moments is almost a cliché. That doesn't mean it isn't true. J.K. Rowling finds herself 7 years after college with a failed marriage, no job, single parent, kids she can barely feed, and approaching homelessness. A teenage Charlie Parker thinks he is tearing it up on stage, right in the pocket with the rest of the crew, until Joe Jones throws a cymbal at him and chases him away in humiliation. A young Lyndon Johnson is beaten to a pulp by a hill country farm boy over a girl, finally shattering his picture of himself as cock of the walk. There are many ways to hit bottom. Almost everyone does in their own way at some point. In the novel Fight Club, the character Jack's apartment is blown up. All of his possessions, every stick of furniture, which he pathetically loved, were lost. Later it turns out that Jack blew it up himself. He had multiple personalities, and Tyler Durden orchestrated the explosion to shock Jack from the sad stupor he was afraid to do anything about. The result was a journey into an entirely different and rather dark part of his life. In Greek mythology, characters often experience katabasis, or a going down. They're forced to retreat, they experience a depression, or in some cases literally descend into the underworld. When they emerge, it's with heightened knowledge and understanding. Today, we'd call that hell, and on occasion we all spend some time there. We surround ourselves with distractions, illusions, and lies about what makes us happy. We become people we shouldn't be and engage in destructive, ego-derived behaviors. This unhealthy state hardens and becomes almost permanent, until katabasis forces us to face it. Durus dura franguntur. Hard things are broken by hard things. The bigger the ego, the harder the fall. It would be nice if we didn't have to be humbled so violently. But as Reverend William A. Sutton observed some 120 years ago, we cannot be humble except by enduring humiliations. Sometimes, hitting bottom is the only way for the blind to see. Many significant life changes come from moments in which we are thoroughly demolished, in which everything we thought we knew about the world is rendered false. These are Fight Club moments. Sometimes self-inflicted, sometimes inflicted by others, they are catalysts for changes we were petrified to make. Pick a moment in your life, a boss's eviscerating critique, a tough conversation with someone you love, a call from a creditor, or news that leaves you speechless. These moments expose truth. No longer can you hide or pretend. They raise questions. How do I make sense of this? How do I move onward? Is this the bottom, or is there more? Someone told me my problems, so how do I fix them? How did I let this happen? How can it never happen again? A look at history finds these events usually have three traits. They almost always come from some outside force or person. They often involve truths about ourselves we were too scared to admit. From the ruin comes opportunity for progress and improvement. Does everyone take advantage of that opportunity? Ego often causes the crash and blocks improvement. Was the 2008 financial crisis not a moment of raw truth for many? For some, it was a wake-up call. For others, it was ignored, and the next time, it will hurt worse. Hemingway understood this. The world breaks every one, and afterward many are strong at the broken places. But those that will not break it kills. In 12-step programs, almost every step is about suppressing ego and clearing out baggage, so the real self can emerge. Denial, the ego refusing to face unpleasant truths, is a powerful force. Threatened egotism is dangerous. The gang member whose honor is questioned, the narcissist rejected, the bully shamed. Sometimes we escalate in response to unbearable exposure, ego in its purest, most toxic form. Look at Lance Armstrong. Cheating was widespread, but once exposed, he doubled down on denial and ruined others' lives in the process. Ego can blind us to the simplest path. Admit, correct, move on. John 3 verse 20 sums it up. Everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. Big or small, exposure is uncomfortable, but turning away delays reckoning. Change begins by hearing criticism, even when harsh or unfair. In Fight Club, Jack must firebomb his own apartment to break through. Painful truths often demand painful actions. Vince Lombardi, a team, like men, must be brought to its knees before it can rise again. Hitting bottom is brutal, but the perspective afterward is liberating. President Obama described it, "I've been in the barrel tumbling down Niagara Falls and I emerged, and I lived, and that's such a liberating feeling." Draw the line. It can ruin your life only if it ruins your character. John DeLorean ran his company into the ground. Instead of stopping, reflecting, or taking responsibility, he escalated. A $60 million drug deal, arrest, humiliation. Ego dug him deeper. Mistakes are natural. Failures happen. The issue is ego. When identity is tied to work, failure threatens self-image. The sunk cost fallacy drives poor decisions. Steve Jobs' firing from Apple was his fault. His ego had caused mismanagement. But his response was measured: grief, then reflection, then new ventures, next, Pixar, where he rebuilt skills, corrected mistakes, and ultimately returned stronger. Dov Charney of American Apparel, in contrast, doubled down on ego, litigation, and self-destruction. He lost his company, money, and credibility. Ego kills what we love, sometimes almost killing us in the process. Alexander Hamilton warned, "If you cannot reasonably hope for a favorable extrication, do not plunge deeper. Have the courage to make a full stop." A full stop doesn't mean quit. It means stop the self-destructive escalation caused by ego. Recognize limits, reassess, and act wisely. Maintain your own scorecard. I never look back, except to find out about mistakes. I only see danger in thinking back about things you are proud of. April 16, 2000. Tom Brady, 6th round, 199th pick. 4th string quarterback. By his second season, Super Bowl MVP. A career for the ages. The Patriots didn't just celebrate, they studied their own misjudgment, holding themselves to higher standards. Scott Pioli kept a photo of a failed draftee as a reminder: you're not as good as you think. Stay focused. Do better. John Wooden emphasized the same principle. The scoreboard doesn't define success. Success is measured by personal standards, not external applause. Warren Buffett, use an inner scorecard. External markers, luck, awards, or recognition are distractions. True winning is becoming the best version of yourself. Adam Smith, when evaluating ourselves, consider the perspective of an impartial observer. Passions cloud judgment during action. Reflection after the fact gives clarity. Holding ego against a high personal standard reduces the likelihood of moral lapses, greed, and selfishness. It fosters long-term thinking, resilience, and humility. True improvement is incremental, disciplined, and self-measured. Ego blocks it. Smash ego with higher standards, not for pride or applause, but for real, sustainable progress. Always love. And why should we feel anger at the world? As if the world would notice. In 1939, a young prodigy named Orson Welles was given an unprecedented deal in Hollywood. He could write, act, and direct 2 films of his choosing for RKO, a major studio. For his first picture, he chose to tell the story of a mysterious newspaper baron who became a prisoner of his own empire and lifestyle. William Randolph Hearst, the infamous media magnate, decided the movie was about him, and offensively so. He launched an all-consuming campaign to destroy one of the greatest films of all time, Citizen Kane. Here's what makes this interesting. Hearst likely never even saw the movie, so he had no idea what it contained. The movie wasn't meant to solely vilify him, it humanized a composite character. Hearst, at 78 and near the end of his life, was one of the richest men in the world. Why spend so much energy on a first-time director's film? Ironically, his campaign to suppress the movie secured its place in history and cemented his legacy as a reviled figure more than any critic could have. This is the paradox of hate and bitterness. It often accomplishes the opposite of what we hope. In modern terms, this is called the Streisand effect. Attempts to destroy something often ensure it spreads further. Hearst's actions were extreme. He sent gossip columnist Luella Parsons to demand a screening, then blocked the film's promotion, threatened theater chains, offered to buy and destroy the rights, and even involved the FBI. The movie failed commercially at first but eventually secured its place in history. We all face things that piss us off. The more powerful or successful we are, the more we feel the need to protect our image and legacy. If unchecked, this leads to wasted time, anger, and bitterness. History is full of needless death, waste, and destruction caused by anger over trivial or fleeting matters. A better response? For the neighbor who won't turn down the music. For the parent who let you down. For the bureaucrat who lost your paperwork. For the group that rejects you. For the critic who attacks you. For the former partner who betrayed you. If love is too much, at least let it go. Shake your head, laugh, move on. Otherwise, history repeats itself. Rich, powerful, and deluded people turn minor inconveniences into massive festering wounds. Nixon's self-destruction, despite his re-election, is one example. Hate fed him, isolated him, and ultimately destroyed his effectiveness. Frederick Douglass offers a different model. When ordered to move to the baggage car due to his race, he refused to feel degraded. The soul that is within me no man can degrade. I am not the one that is being degraded, but those who are inflicting it upon me. Great leaders, Douglass, Barbara Jordan, Martin Luther King Jr., embraced love, empathy, and understanding. Hate is debilitating. Love is transformational. Hate is a cancer that erodes the vital center of life. Inventory yourself. Who do you dislike? Who fills you with revulsion? Have these feelings helped you achieve anything? Rarely. Rage and hatred almost never help. They just tether you to the past. Even success doesn't shield us from this. Dave Mustaine, ousted from Metallica, became consumed by rage despite later fame. Obsession with past slights, resentment, and revenge is ego at work. It keeps you stuck while everyone else moves on. Love, in contrast, is egoless, open, productive, and freeing. Orson Welles, confronted with decades of Hearst suppression, responded with humor and resilience. He continued creating art, lived a fulfilling life, and never became bitter. The slight did not define him. For everything that comes next, is the enemy. I don't like work, no man does, but I like what is in the work, the chance to find yourself. William Manchester's biography of Winston Churchill highlights his isolation during critical years. Alone against peers and rising fascism, Churchill persevered and triumphed. Katharine Graham also stood alone as she ran her family's newspaper empire. Her son, Donald Graham, faced similar pressure later. Both survived and succeeded. So can you. Difficulty, failure, and adversity are inevitable. Benjamin Franklin. Those who drink to the bottom of the cup must expect to meet some of the dregs. But these dregs are lessons. Harold Janine. People learn from their failures. Seldom do they learn anything from success. Celtic wisdom. See much, study much, suffer much. That is the path to wisdom. Where you are now can be a path to wisdom. Ego is the swing vote. Aspiration leads to success. Success creates its own challenges. Adversity leads to aspiration and new achievements. Life is a loop. We occupy different points on this continuum. Failure hurts, but ego makes failure permanent. Unless we learn from mistakes, ego will perpetuate failure. All great men and women face difficulties. They made mistakes. They found value even in failures, learning self-awareness and humility. Without it, they couldn't rise again. The mantra is simple, though never easy. Don't aspire from ego. Seek success without ego. Push through failure with strength, not ego. Epilogue. There is something like a civil war within each of our lives, a struggle between the recalcitrant south of our soul and the north of our soul. This internal conflict exists in every individual. If you're reading this, you've made it through this book. I wasn't sure everyone would. And, to be honest, I wasn't even sure I would. How do you feel? Tired? Confused? Free? Facing ego is not easy. First, we must acknowledge it exists. Then, we must scrutinize and challenge it. Most of us avoid this because self-examination is uncomfortable. Some of the world's greatest accomplishments may even result from this avoidance, anything to distract from confronting the ego. By making it to this point, you've already struck a serious blow against your ego. It's not the end of the journey, but it's a start. My friend, philosopher, and martial artist Daniele Bolelli offered a helpful metaphor. Training is like sweeping the floor. Clean it once, and the dust returns. Sweep every day, or the floor becomes unmanageable. Ego works the same way. Its dust accumulates quickly and can cause enormous damage. Consider Dov Charney, fired by American Apparel. He called me at 3 a.m., alternating between anger and despair, convinced he was blameless. When I asked him what he would do next, he said, "Ryan, Steve Jobs died." In his mind, this failure equaled death. I watched over the months as ego destroyed the company he had built. This could happen to anyone. By grace, it hasn't happened to us yet. Even in writing this book, I faced repeated rejection, for hard-fought drafts of the proposal, dozens of manuscript revisions. Previously, I might have quit or let ego ruin the process. I developed a ritual. After each draft, I shredded the pages and fed them to my worm compost. Months later, the paper became nourishing dirt, a tangible reminder that life, and even our failures, are part of something larger. A key realization came from understanding the fallacy of thinking our lives are grand monuments meant to last forever. Ambitious people often feel pressured to achieve great things or else be failures. But this pressure, fueled by ego, can break us. Potential and goals are real: starting a company, completing a creative work, chasing a championship, but ego can corrupt these pursuits. It whispers lies at the beginning, during success, and especially during failure. Initially a tool, ego can become an end in itself. Most consequences of ego are not catastrophic, but they are real. In Bud Schulberg's What Makes Sammy Run, a ruthless Hollywood mogul's success and fear slowly consume him. His vengeance and ambitions already carry their own punishment: loneliness, insecurity, obsession with being surpassed. Ego manifests as a slow, consuming disease. I first read that passage at 19. I understood it intellectually and emotionally, but I still made poor choices, thinking one sweep of the floor was enough. 10 years later, the lessons hit me in the way I needed. Bismarck said any fool can learn from experience. The trick is to learn from others' experience. This book began with that idea, but I also crashed into my own ego along the way. You may need to do the same. Plutarch reminds us, we gain knowledge more from experience than from words. Here's the central lesson: wanting to achieve professionally is admirable. Wanting to be better, happier, balanced, humble, selfless, these are equally or more important. Perfecting the personal often leads to professional success, but not the other way around. Working to refine your thoughts, controlling destructive impulses, and sweeping the floor of ego is not just moral, it is practical and transformative. So, here you are, at the end of a journey through ego, others' experiences, and my own. Well now, your choices. What will you do with this knowledge, today and tomorrow? Every day, you will face 3 phases: aspiration, success, failure. Ego will appear in each. Mistakes will happen in each. Sweep the floor every minute of every day, and then sweep again.
And that's the end of this book. Thank you so much for listening and sharing your time with this story. If you'd like to hear more, subscribing to the channel is the best way to stay updated. Your support means the world.